In this video, we'll be breaking down 2 hours of the craziest Family Guy facts. First up, we got the fact that Brian actually dies, and Stewie brings him back with time travel. Brian dies, and Stewie saves him with time travel. Brian Griffin died because Stewie destroyed his time machine, and then proceeded to spend an entire month grieving before finally getting his act together to save his best friend. This 2-episode arc became one of the most talked about moments in Family Guy history, causing fans to lose their minds on social media, while Seth MacFarlane presumably sat back and watched the chaos unfold like some kind of animated puppet master. The whole disaster kicked off in the episode Life of Brian, when Stewie and Brian found themselves running from hostile Native Americans in jeeps. This happened because they had taken a little field trip to Jamestown in the past and made the brilliant decision to hand out guns to the Native Americans, which resulted in the white settlers getting completely wiped out. Brian explained this catastrophic timeline change while they were literally fleeing for their lives, because apparently that's the best time to have a casual conversation about how you accidentally erased an entire colonial settlement. Stewie discovered his return pad got shot full of holes during the chase, turning their ticket home into Swiss cheese. Rather than panic like a normal person, Stewie decided they should just pop over to the alternate timeline version of himself and borrow his time machine. They headed to their house in this messed up timeline, grabbed the equivalent time machine and return pad, traveled back to Jamestown right after their original selves left, took back the guns, and returned everything to normal. Your standard Tuesday afternoon for these two. After dealing with yet another near-death experience caused by their time travel shenanigans, Stewie made a decision that would haunt him for the next month. He was tired of the close calls and constant danger, so he destroyed his time machine completely. He didn't just turn it off or put it in storage like a reasonable genius baby would do. He crushed the remains at the junkyard, making sure there was absolutely no way to rebuild it. This is like deleting your backup hard drive right before your computer crashes, except the consequences involve your best friend dying instead of just losing some photos. While they were at the junkyard completing this monumentally short-sighted decision, Stewie and Brian found a street hockey net just sitting there. They decided to take it home for some exercise, because finding random sports equipment at a junkyard and bringing it home is apparently normal behavior in Quahog. They set up the net in front of their house, ready to play some wholesome street hockey. This is where everything went sideways faster than a car losing control on a residential street. Brian got hit by a car, not grazed, not bumped, but absolutely crushed. The driver didn't slow down, didn't swerve, just plowed straight into him while he was playing hockey. This is the kind of accident that makes you question whether Quahog has any traffic laws whatsoever, or if the town just operates on pure chaos energy. The family rushed Brian to the vet's office, where the situation became immediately clear that this was not a minor injury. Brian was near death, and there was nothing the vet could do to save him. The family gathered around to say their goodbyes, which had to be the most emotionally devastating moment for a show that usually spends its time making jokes about 1,980 seconds pop culture references. Brian recovered just enough consciousness to tell the family he loved them before dying right there in the vet's office. Stewie immediately started blaming himself because he was the one who destroyed the time machine. If he had kept it intact, he could have just hopped back in time and prevented the entire accident. Instead, he had to watch his best friend die, knowing he had destroyed the one piece of technology that could have saved him. The guilt hit Stewie like a freight train, or in this case, like a car hitting a dog playing street hockey. Stewie got the idea to rebuild his time machine to save Brian. This seemed like the obvious solution, except for one tiny problem. He went to his dealer to get the necessary parts, and the dealer couldn't supply him with what he needed. The parts were unavailable, gone, completely out of reach. Stewie realized Brian might be lost for good, which is the kind of hopeless situation that would make anyone want to curl up in a corner and give up on life entirely. The family and friends held a funeral for Brian, gathering together to mourn the loss of their talking dog who drank martinis and had terrible luck with women. A month passed, not a day, not a week, but an entire month, where the Griffin family had to navigate life without Brian. Lois decided the family needed to move forward and suggested getting a new pet. They went to the pet store, which is apparently where you go in Quahog when you need to replace a family member who is also a talking dog with opinions about literature and politics. At the store, they found another talking dog named Vinny. Peter decided Vinny would be their new pet, bringing him home like they were just swapping out a broken appliance for a newer model. Vinny made himself comfortable immediately. He offered to make dinner for the family, which is a bold move for a dog who just got adopted 5 minutes ago. He managed to ingratiate himself with most of the Griffins pretty quickly, showing off his cooking skills and general likability. Peter introduced Vinny to his friends at the Drunken Clam, and they became drinking buddies. This is peak Peter behavior, finding a new best friend to get drunk with, approximately 30 seconds after meeting them. The guys accepted Vinny into their group, and everything seemed to be settling into a new normal for everyone except one person. Stewie was absolutely not happy with Vinny. While everyone else was moving on and accepting this Italian-American dog into the family, Stewie was still grieving Brian and resenting this replacement. Stewie decided he needed to ruin Vinny's reputation and get him kicked out of the house. His plan involved feeding Vinny some sad Italian news, which is such a weirdly specific sabotage attempt that only Stewie could come up with it. The plan fell apart when Chris ruined everything by calling Stewie names, derailing the entire scheme. Stewie's revenge plot crashed and burned faster than his time machine. Later that night, Vinny heard Stewie crying in his room. He found Stewie still completely devastated over losing Brian, which makes sense considering they were best friends, and Stewie blamed himself for the whole situation. Vinny offered some genuine comfort and explained that he had lost his last owner too. He felt a connection with Stewie because they had both experienced losing someone important to them. Vinny understood the grief Stewie was going through, and instead of being offended by Stewie's earlier attempts to ruin him, he showed empathy and kindness. Stewie started to accept Vinny after this conversation, and they began to bond over their shared experience with loss. At bedtime, Vinny offered to stay with Stewie, showing he genuinely cared about the kid despite all the hostility. Time moved forward to Christmas, and the family was looking forward to the Christmas carnival. They headed to the mall, expecting festivities and holiday cheer, but discovered the carnival had been completely canceled. This annoyed Stewie so much that he went on a destructive streak, which is probably the most relatable response to canceled holiday plans that any character has ever had. Vinny did some investigating and discovered that Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's wealthy father, was the one who canceled the carnival. Peter confronted Carter about ruining Christmas for everyone, and Carter explained that he hated Christmas, so he just canceled the whole thing because he could. When you're that rich, apparently, you can just cancel community events based on your personal feelings about holidays. Peter made it his mission to help Carter find his Christmas spirit. He tried multiple approaches, including a fake story letter, forcing Carter to drink eggnog, and even having him masturbate. None of these methods worked because apparently, Peter's understanding of Christmas spirit involves activities that have nothing to do with actual holiday traditions. Finally, Peter accused Carter of acting Jewish, which somehow worked where everything else failed. Carter reversed his position on the carnival immediately, proving that Peter's methods are both wildly inappropriate and occasionally effective through sheer accident. The carnival got reinstated, but it failed to raise Stewie's spirits at all. When Santa asked Stewie what he wanted for Christmas, Stewie had a revelation. He told Santa he wanted Brian back. Santa was skeptical about this request, probably because bringing dead pets back to life falls slightly outside the normal range of Christmas wishes. Vinny tried his best to cheer Stewie up by pretending to be Brian. He attempted to act like an intellectual and a writer, mimicking Brian's personality traits. The impression failed completely to win Stewie over, even when Vinny gave him Christmas gifts. Stewie could see right through the act, because Vinny was Vinny, and Brian was Brian, and no amount of pretending could change that fundamental fact. To try raising Stewie's spirits, they went back to the mall. While they were there, Stewie spotted something that changed everything. He saw his past self buying a toy, the same toy he had purchased just before Brian's death. This meant the past was literally happening right in front of him, and more importantly, past Stewie still had the time return pad in his backpack. Stewie realized he could get his hands on that return pad and use it to save Brian. He enlisted Vinny's help for this plan, because even though Vinny was Brian's replacement, he was willing to help Stewie bring Brian back. Vinny appealed to past Stewie's vanity to get him to take off his backpack. This is genuinely brilliant strategy, because if there's one thing Stewie cannot resist, it's his own ego. Once passed, Stewie removed the backpack. Present Stewie grabbed the time return pad. He prepared to go back in time to save Brian, which meant undoing everything that had happened over the past month. Stewie said his goodbyes to Vinny, and this is where things got emotionally complicated in a way that Family Guy rarely attempts. Stewie admitted to Vinny that his actions would erase their entire relationship. Once he saved Brian, the timeline would change, and they would never have met. Vinny would never be adopted by the Griffins, never bond with Stewie over their shared grief, never become part of the family. Everything they had experienced together would cease to exist. Vinny understood this completely and bid Stewie well anyway, showing a level of selflessness that most people would struggle with. He was essentially agreeing to erase himself from Stewie's life so that Stewie could have his best friend back. Stewie traveled to the past and arrived just in time to save Brian from getting hit by the car. He stopped the accident from ever happening, grabbing Brian and pulling him out of the way before the car could crush him. Brian was understandably confused about what was happening, so Stewie explained everything. He told Brian about the death, the funeral, the month without him, meeting Vinny, and the plan to fix the timeline. Brian listened to this explanation about his own death and resurrection, which has to be one of the weirdest conversations anyone could possibly have. Stewie sent the time pad back to the present, completing the timeline alteration. Having changed the timeline, Stewie started fading from existence. This happened because he was from the timeline where Brian died, and by saving Brian, he was erasing the events that led to his own presence in that moment. Stewie disappeared right there in front of Brian, who was grateful for his actions, even as he watched his best friend fade away like some kind of time travel magic trick. This is the kind of sacrifice that actually carries weight, because Stewie gave up his own existence in that timeline to save Brian. Back in the present, reality had been rewritten. Brian was alive and well, playing street hockey like nothing had ever happened. The accident never occurred, the month of grief never happened, Vinny never joined the family, and the timeline was restored to how it should have been. Brian thanked Stewie for saving him, showing genuine gratitude for his friend's actions. Stewie acted casual about the whole thing, because acknowledging the emotional weight of literally erasing himself from existence to save his friend would be too much sincerity for these two. The whole arc proved that Family Guy could tell emotionally resonant stories when they wanted to, even if they had to kill off a main character and introduce a replacement just to get there. Fans went through a month of real-world time thinking Brian was permanently dead, experiencing genuine grief over a fictional talking dog. The show creators managed to pull off a bait-and-switch that generated massive attention and emotional investment, then resolved it with a time travel story that actually worked within the show's established rules. Brian's death and resurrection became a defining moment for the series, showing that even a show built on cutaway gags and crude humor could make people care deeply about its characters when the story called for it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the fact that Peter succeeds creates Ptoria. Peter succeeds and creates Ptoria. Peter Griffin started his own country because he got mad about taxes, which is basically the most American thing anyone could possibly do. This whole situation kicked off when Peter learned that his neighbors had gotten tax refunds and immediately spent their money on ridiculous purchases. Cleveland bought a trampoline because apparently Cleveland's idea of a good investment is a device specifically designed to launch people into the air with zero safety considerations. Quagmire purchased a plug-in sex doll, which tracks perfectly with everything we know about Quagmire as a person. Joe got himself a digital TV with surround sound, showing that even a paralyzed cop needs quality entertainment systems in his life. Peter wanted to use his tax refund to purchase a swimming pool. This seemed like a reasonable goal compared to Quagmire's mechanical companion situation. The problem was that Peter got audited by the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, and they denied him his tax refund. The IRS basically looked at Peter's finances, decided something was wrong, and shut down his pool dreams before they could even start. Rather than accept defeat like a normal person, Peter decided he would just build a backyard pool himself. This is peak Peter logic, thinking he could construct a major home addition without any professional help or understanding of basic construction principles. Peter's DIY pool project went sideways immediately when he accidentally cut a power line during construction. A man from the power company showed up to deal with the electrical disaster Peter had created, and this is where things got interesting. The power company representative revealed that the town's zoning laws actually prohibited building a pool on Peter's property. Peter had not only failed at construction, but had also failed at the basic research step of checking whether his plan was even legal. He decided to request a zoning permit, which led him straight to Mayor Adam West. Mayor Adam West examined Peter's request and discovered something absolutely wild. Peter's house was not even part of the United States. This is the kind of technicality that sounds completely made up, but apparently the property lines were drawn in such a way that the Griffin house existed outside of U.S. territory. This meant Peter's house was technically not subject to American laws, regulations, or zoning restrictions. Most people would have just used this information to build their pool and call it a day, but Peter saw an opportunity for something much bigger and much dumber. Peter declared his house to be the new microstate of Ptoria. He didn't just claim independence quietly, he went full dictator mode and created an entire country out of his property. This is like finding out your apartment technically isn't part of the building and deciding to establish a sovereign nation in your living room. Peter spent a night in Quahog celebrating his newfound diplomatic immunity by breaking every law he could think of. He went to the bar and insulted Horace the bartender, which is surprisingly tame compared to what came next. Peter brought beer out into the streets, violating open container laws. He stepped on grass that had signs specifically saying not to step on it, because apparently respecting public property is optional when you're a head of state. Peter continued his crime spree by littering, committing sexual harassment, and engaging in vandalism. He was running around Quahog, treating American laws like suggestions, secure in the knowledge that he had diplomatic immunity. To really drive the point home, Peter started singing a parody of MC Hammer's song, "You Can't Touch This," while committing these various offenses. He flaunted his diplomatic status through song, which is either brilliant or completely unhinged, depending on your perspective. Peter even mentioned in the song that he couldn't be sued by MC Hammer, showing he was aware of the legal implications of parodying copyrighted music while representing a foreign nation. Peter's reign as dictator of Ptoria took a turn when he got advice from the diplomat from Iraq. This diplomat suggested that Peter should annex more territory to expand his country, because apparently, international relations advice from Iraq in the year 2000 was exactly what Peter needed to hear. Peter decided to annex Joe's pool and called the newly conquered territory Johio. This is a genuinely clever name that combines Joe's name with Ohio, showing Peter put at least 3 seconds of thought into his colonial expansion. Taking over Joe's pool seemed like a victimless crime to Peter, probably because he forgot that Joe actually lived there and might have opinions about his pool being annexed. The annexation of Joe's pool precipitated Operation Desert Clam, which is a parody name of Operation Desert Storm. The United States government was not amused by Peter's territorial expansion and decided to respond with military force. Days passed, and when Chris tried to go to school, he got turned away at the door. The United States military had surrounded and blockaded the nation of Ptoria with tanks and missiles. This is an absolutely disproportionate response to a guy taking over his neighbor's pool, but the U.S. military apparently takes property disputes very seriously when diplomatic immunity is involved. The blockade cut off all electricity and water to Peter's house. The U.S. government was treating Ptoria like an actual hostile nation, implementing sanctions and cutting off essential utilities. This meant the Griffin family was living in a house with no power and no running water, all because Peter wanted a swimming pool and got carried away with the whole independence thing. Lois had to homeschool the kids because they couldn't leave the house to go to actual school. Meg, Chris, and Stewie were stuck learning from their mother while tanks surrounded their property, which has to be the weirdest educational environment any child could experience. Peter found himself in an increasingly difficult position as the leader of Ptoria. His country consisted of one house. He had no allies, no resources, and the world's most powerful military parked on his lawn. The situation escalated further when Lois and the children decided they had enough of Peter's political ambitions. They left Ptoria and went back to the United States, abandoning Peter to deal with the consequences of his actions. This left Peter as the sole citizen of his country, which is both the most pathetic and most predictable outcome of his decision to declare independence. The United States government gave Peter an ultimatum called Operation Bomb the Crap Out of Your House. This is possibly the most straightforward military operation name in history, leaving absolutely no ambiguity about what was going to happen if Peter didn't comply. The U.S. was threatening to literally bomb Peter's house into rubble if he refused to negotiate. This is the kind of threat that makes you reconsider your life choices, especially when those choices involved creating a fake country and stealing your neighbor's pool. Peter was forced into negotiating for a repatriation. He had to sit down with U.S. officials and work out the terms of Ptoria rejoining the United States. This negotiation process probably involved Peter realizing that running a country is significantly harder than he thought, especially when that country is just your house and the most powerful nation on earth wants to blow it up. The negotiations concluded with Peter agreeing to end Ptoria's existence and return things to how they were before his independence declaration. Peter ended up repatriating his country, which is a fancy way of saying he gave up and admitted the United States owned his house again. Part of the deal involved returning Joe's pool, which Peter had renamed Johio during his brief period of colonial expansion. Joe got his pool back, presumably relieved that his property was no longer part of a hostile foreign nation. The whole situation resolved itself with Peter abandoning his dreams of nationhood and going back to being a regular American citizen subject to regular American laws. Lois was grateful to Peter for finally ending the standoff. As a reward for giving up his country and not getting their house bombed into oblivion, Lois promised to scratch Peter's back with a matchbook every night. This is an oddly specific and somewhat concerning reward, but it apparently meant something to Peter. The promise of nightly back scratching with a matchbook was enough to make Peter feel good about surrendering his sovereignty, which says a lot about Peter's priorities and possibly about the state of the Griffin marriage. The episode ended with a twist that recontextualized everything that had just happened. All the events of the episode turned out to have been filmed and used in social studies classes 200 years in the future. This means that in the year 2200, students are learning about Peter Griffin's failed micronation as part of their curriculum. Future historians apparently considered Peter's brief reign over Ptoria to be significant enough to include in educational materials, which is either a testament to how important the event was or a sign that future education has very low standards for historical significance. The whole episode served as a satirical look at national sovereignty, diplomatic immunity, and what happens when an idiot gets too much power. Peter went from wanting a swimming pool to creating an international incident complete with military blockades and threats of aerial bombardment. His journey from frustrated homeowner to dictator to defeated negotiator happened in the span of a few days, showing that Peter's ability to escalate situations is matched only by his ability to catastrophically mishandle them. The concept of Ptoria highlighted how absurd modern nation-states can be when you strip away all the history and tradition. Peter's house nation had all the trappings of a real country, including diplomatic immunity, territorial expansion, and international recognition, even if that recognition came in the form of tanks and missiles. The episode poked fun at Cold War-era international relations, showing how quickly disputes over minor issues can escalate into major conflicts when pride and sovereignty get involved. Peter's decision to annex Joe's pool mirrored real-world territorial disputes, except instead of oil fields or strategic waterways, The contested territory was a backyard swimming pool in Rhode Island. The U.S. military response to Peter's annexation was comically disproportionate, but also served as commentary on how nations respond to perceived threats to their authority. Operation Desert Clam was a direct parody of military operations in the Middle East, comparing Peter's poolside conquest to actual wars fought over resources and territory. The episode also explored the consequences of Peter's selfishness on his family. Lois and the kids suffered through the blockade, living without electricity or water because Peter refused to back down from his position. The family eventually had to leave Peter behind to escape the situation, showing that even the people who love Peter have limits to what they'll tolerate. His isolation as the sole citizen of Ptoria forced him to confront the reality that being right or thinking you're right doesn't matter if you're completely alone. The resolution through negotiation rather than violence was probably the most mature outcome Peter could have achieved, even if he only agreed to it because the alternative was having his house destroyed by bombs. Peter learned that diplomatic immunity and national sovereignty come with responsibilities and consequences he wasn't prepared to handle. His experiment in nation building lasted less than a week before collapsing under the combined weight of international pressure and his family's abandonment. The future classroom footage at the end suggested that Peter's story became a cautionary tale about the limits of individual sovereignty and the importance of following established legal systems. Students 200 years later were studying Peter's failed country as an example of what not to do, which means Peter's legacy was being used to educate future generations about civic responsibility. This is probably the closest Peter Griffin will ever get to having a positive impact on society, even if that impact comes from being the world's most documented example of what happens when you take property disputes too far. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that the giant chicken fights destroy cities and recur across seasons. The giant chicken fights destroy cities and recur across seasons. The whole thing kicked off in the episode Da Boom from Season 2. Peter was at a store when a man in a chicken suit approached him offering a coupon. Peter refused and explained why through a flashback. Ernie the giant chicken had given Peter a coupon at some point in the past, but when Peter tried to use it, he discovered the coupon was expired. This minor inconvenience triggered Peter to attack Ernie in a prolonged fistfight that took the two combatants all over downtown. They fought through streets, across rooftops, and caused massive destruction wherever they went. Peter appeared to defeat Ernie by slamming his head into a photocopier repeatedly, which would kill any normal chicken, but Ernie was not a normal chicken. The chicken did a sneak attack on Peter, putting him in a chokehold that resulted in both of them falling off an office building, with Peter landing on top of him. When Peter walked away from the scene, Ernie opened his eye, revealing he was still alive and setting up the pattern that would repeat for years to come. The fights always followed the same basic structure. Ernie would show up randomly in the middle of an unrelated scene. Peter would recognize him, and they would immediately start fighting without any additional conversation or explanation. The battle would interrupt whatever plot was happening in the episode and last anywhere from 1 minute to over 6 minutes of screen time. Peter and Ernie would fight their way across Quahog, destroying buildings, vehicles, and anything else in their path. Innocent bystanders got caught in the crossfire regularly, with people getting crushed by falling debris, hit by cars, or otherwise injured as collateral damage. Peter would eventually defeat Ernie in some gruesome fashion that appeared to kill him. Peter would return to the original scene, battered and bruised, pick up exactly where he left off, and continue with the episode like nothing happened. After Peter left, Ernie would open his eye or move slightly, showing he survived and foreshadowing their next inevitable confrontation. The second major fight happened in Blind Ambition from Season 4. Ernie returned to assault Peter when he was defending Quagmire. This fight took place at multiple locations, including a train station, a cruise ship, and finally an airport. The cruise ship sequence showed Peter and Ernie landing on a wealthy couple who were complaining about their steak, crushing them completely. During one part of the fight, Ernie knocked Peter into the bowels of the cruise ship, showing he was actually winning for a moment. The fight concluded at an airport, where Ernie's head got chopped up by an airplane propeller in a scene that spoofed Raiders of the Lost Ark. This should have killed him permanently, but after Peter left, Ernie's leg moved into a fist, proving he was still alive despite being decapitated by aircraft machinery. This fight introduced what would later be called the chicken scream, a distinctive sound effect that became associated with their battles. The third fight occurred in No Chris Left Behind from Season 5. This one was memorable because it invaded the Griffin home. Ernie kicked down Peter's door and entered the house while Peter and Lois were arguing about Peter needing to find a new job. Their fight completely wrecked the entire Griffin house, destroying furniture, walls, and everything else inside. After demolishing their own home, the fight carried over to Quagmire's house, wrecking his place too. They broke through several more houses before ending up in the middle of the streets where they got hit by a car. In the city, they fought their way into a building and climbed to the roof. Peter tied Ernie up in a rope and latched it onto a passing plane, yanking Ernie away and seemingly ending the fight. During this battle, Peter and Ernie actually took time to remember what they were fighting about in the first place. They realized it was all over an expired coupon and decided to make peace. Ernie invited Peter to dinner and brought his wife Nicole, who revealed Ernie's actual name during the meal. Just as Peter and Ernie seemed to have resolved their differences, another fight broke out when both insisted on paying the bill. They grabbed every cooking instrument in the restaurant and beat each other with pots, pans, and kitchen utensils. Despite having his brains bashed in by a frying pan, Ernie survived again, opening his eye after Peter left. Internal Affairs from Season 10 featured what many fans consider the greatest chicken fight in the series. This battle lasted approximately 5 minutes and took the violence to science fiction levels. Peter accidentally backed his car into Ernie's vehicle, setting off another fight. During their struggle, they accidentally stepped on Stewie's time travel pad. This caused them to fight their way across time itself, bouncing through different eras of history. They collided with Marty McFly and the DeLorean time machine in 1885, referencing Back to the Future Part 3. The fight continued until they ended up in a genetic research lab where hundreds of Peter and Ernie clones appeared, creating a massive brawl between multiple versions of both fighters. They eventually launched themselves into outer space, where they fought in zero gravity. An astronaut got caught in the crossfire and his head exploded from explosive decompression. Peter briefly vomited during the space fight, and the vomit slowly floated through zero gravity onto Ernie's face. They crashed back to Earth on an oil rig where they continued fighting. Their struggle destroyed the entire oil rig, and Ernie appeared to be hanged, pierced, and then roasted by rocket engines. As Peter struggled to shore exhausted from the battle, Ernie showed he had survived yet again, proving his immortality was basically a superpower at this point. Yug Yilimov from Season 11 showed a chicken fight played in reverse. Brian had used Stewie's time machine without permission to pick up women, and when he tried to cover his tracks by resetting the machine, he accidentally broke it and reversed the flow of time. This meant viewers watched an entire chicken fight play backwards. The fight showed Peter hitting Ernie with his car door while Ernie was riding a bicycle, which started the confrontation. Ernie fired a flamethrower at Peter during the reversed sequence. Their fight caused a plane crash that destroyed a military surplus store. They fought backwards through the surplus store, and a grenade accidentally got chucked into a coffee shop window, interrupting a character named Seamus who was about to ask a barista on a date. Watching the fight in reverse revealed all the chaos and destruction from a completely different perspective, showing just how much damage these battles actually caused. The fights caused absolutely catastrophic destruction to Quahog and wherever else they happened to be. Buildings collapsed, vehicles exploded, people died, and entire city blocks got leveled during their brawls. Each fight featured serious casualties to bystanders who were just going about their normal day when two angry combatants crashed through their location. The property damage alone would cost millions or possibly billions of dollars to repair. Cars got crushed, planes crashed, cruise ships got destroyed, oil rigs exploded, and restaurants got demolished. The fights treated human life and property as completely disposable, with Peter and Ernie caring only about defeating each other regardless of the consequences. Peter's kill count from all his actions throughout the series is estimated to be in the hundreds, with the chicken fights alone probably accounting for a significant portion of that number. Ernie's family got revealed throughout the series. He had a wife named Nicole, who was also a giant chicken. They had children together, including a son whose name was later revealed to be Nugget. One of Ernie's kids went to the same preschool as Stewie, showing that giant chickens apparently lived normal suburban lives when they were not busy fighting Peter Griffin. Nicole left Ernie at one point for a bigger cock, according to the episode Fecal Matters, taking their 2 chicks with her. They apparently got back together off-screen because they were seen living together when Meg visited their house in The Chicken or the Meg. Peter mentioned in Life of Brian that he no longer accepts coupons from any chickens after the incident with Ernie. A headless chicken at a vet's office angrily told Peter not to talk to him because Peter had a bad reputation in the chicken community. This suggested that Ernie's feud with Peter was well known among chickens, and Peter was considered persona non grata in chicken society because of the ongoing violence. The episode P Terminator from season 19 featured another chicken fight when Peter volunteered to work at a hospital as a nurse. He ended up with Ernie as a patient and refused to care for him. Peter found out Ernie was actually dying and declared himself the victor in their long-running feud. Lois convinced Peter that he actually needed the chicken in his life, which led to a flashback montage of their previous fights during some soul-searching. When Ernie actually died, Peter rushed in and violently administered CPR, bringing him back to life. Peter admitted he actually enjoyed their battles, but also did not want to be solely responsible financially for all the accumulated damages from their fights over the years. This episode suggested Peter and Ernie's relationship was more complicated than simple hatred, with Peter realizing he would miss the fights if they stopped permanently. Meet the Quagmires from season 5 revealed an alternative origin for the feud. When Peter traveled back in time and meddled with his past, he accidentally punched a young Ernie while dancing at a 1,980 seconds prom called Enchantment Under the Sea. This punch angered young Ernie, but another person stopped him and said he would probably never see Peter again. This episode suggested the feud might have started earlier than the expired coupon incident, or that Peter's time traveling created an alternate timeline where their hatred began differently. Ernie appeared in other contexts beyond fighting Peter. He showed up dressed as the character Herbert in A Lot Going On Upstairs, when Brian tried to fool Stewie by dressing family members and neighbors as each other. He appeared as a pimp in a 1973 version of Family Guy in the episode Family Guy Through the Years. In Follow the Money, Ernie and Lois were shown to be good friends, which Peter and Nicole both disliked. Ernie was at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum with his son in Trump Guy, wearing headphones and listening to a tour while oblivious to Peter's fight with Donald Trump happening nearby. In Coma Guy, Peter encountered Ernie while driving to the library to return a Van Halen CD. Ernie wordlessly challenged Peter to a drag race, and Peter got distracted by a squirrel and crashed into a tree, leaving him in a coma. During his comatose state, Peter hallucinated a jury of giant chickens in a courtroom, showing the chickens haunted him even in his unconscious mind. The chicken fights became such an iconic part of Family Guy that they released a special DVD called Peter Griffin vs. the Giant Chicken, featuring episodes with the major fights. The DVD included Da Boom, Blind Ambition, and No Chris Left Behind, marketing the collection as letting viewers witness poultry in motion. The fights became a signature element of the show, representing Family Guy's commitment to absurdist humor and willingness to completely derail episode plots for extended action sequences that contributed nothing to the main story. Seth MacFarlane originally intended for Ernie to die permanently in Internal Affairs, but character designer Peter Shin convinced him to keep Ernie alive for a planned Family Guy movie. This decision meant Ernie survived for several more years and additional fights. However, the character eventually met his definitive end in season 23's The Chicken or the Meg. In this episode, Meg started dating Ernie's son Nugget, which Peter obviously hated. When Meg discovered Ernie was just as terrible a father as Peter, she renounced the giant chicken and fought him herself. Meg defeated and decapitated Ernie, finally killing him permanently after over 20 years of surviving impossible injuries. Writer Alex Sulkin confirmed Ernie was truly dead, explaining they felt the character had run his course and it was time to end the recurring gag. There had not been a full-length chicken fight in close to 15 years before his death, suggesting the show had already moved away from the bit before officially retiring it. The giant chicken fights represented everything Family Guy became known for in its prime. They were absurdist, violent, completely random, and went on far longer than anyone would expect. They showcased the show's willingness to abandon plot structure for the sake of an extended joke. They demonstrated Family Guy's commitment to escalation, with each fight trying to top the previous one in terms of locations, destruction, and impossibility. The fights had no deeper meaning or purpose beyond entertainment value, which was exactly the point. Ernie existed solely to fight Peter, and Peter fought Ernie solely because that was what they did. The expired coupon was forgotten almost immediately, replaced by pure animosity that required no rational explanation. The chicken fights became a perfect example of Family Guy's approach to comedy, where the absurdity itself was the joke, and pushing that absurdity to its absolute limit was how you made it funny. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that Joe lost his legs while fighting a thief modeled after the Grinch. Joe lost his legs while fighting a thief modeled after the Grinch. The fake story Joe told happened in the episode A Hero Sits Next Door, which was Joe's introduction to the series. According to this fabricated version of events, Joe was investigating a robbery at an orphanage one Christmas. He confronted the perpetrator on the roof, and during the face-off with this Grinch-like character, the thief threw a roller skate. Joe slipped on the roller skate, slid off the roof, and fell. The fall injured his spine so severely that he became paralyzed from the waist down. This story painted Joe as a heroic cop who got injured while protecting children at an orphanage during the holidays. It was dramatic, sympathetic, and completely made up. Joe maintained this lie for years, telling it to his friends, his family, and presumably everyone else in Quahog. Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and everyone who knew Joe believed this was how he ended up in a wheelchair. The story became part of Joe's identity as the tough, heroic cop who never let his disability stop him from serving and protecting. Nobody questioned it because Joe was such a dedicated police officer that the story seemed completely believable. A man who would continue working as a cop even after being paralyzed would absolutely be the type to get injured protecting an orphanage. The truth came out in Joe's Revenge, the 5th episode of Season 11. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire were at the Drunken Clam watching Quahog 5 News when they heard breaking news. Bobby Briggs, a notorious heroin mogul nicknamed Bobby the Shirt Briggs, had finally been caught after 15 years on the run. Briggs had started a drug operation back in 1996 and had been evading law enforcement ever since. The news report announced his capture, and Joe immediately became emotional. His friends were confused about why Joe cared so much about some random drug dealer getting arrested, until Joe admitted he had been lying about his past. Joe revealed the real story of how he became paralyzed. Back in 1996, Bobby Briggs was one of the biggest drug lords operating east of Providence, Rhode Island. Joe explained that east of Providence is mostly just open water, which made Briggs's territory somewhat limited but still significant. Briggs ran a major heroin operation, and the Quahog Police Department assigned Joe to bring him down. Joe went undercover, using the fake name Joe Swansonson to infiltrate Briggs' organization. He spent 6 months tracking Bobby's operation, slowly working his way into the inner circle and gaining Briggs's trust. Joe almost had enough evidence to put Bobby Briggs away for life. He had documentation of the drug trafficking, records of sales, and information about the heroin lab operations. However, Joe knew that a taped confession would be the key piece of evidence that would guarantee Briggs would be locked up for a very long time. Joe was wearing a wire during his undercover work, recording everything that happened so the police would have undeniable proof of Briggs's crimes. This is where everything went wrong for Joe. During one conversation at Briggs' heroin lab, Joe asked Bobby about the quantity of drugs in his operation. Instead of using street language or staying in character, Joe accidentally referred to Briggs using his full legal name. This immediately threw Bobby off and made him suspicious. Briggs realized something was wrong with the way Joe was talking to him. The use of his legal name instead of his street nickname was a red flag that suggested Joe might be law enforcement. Briggs confronted Joe about this strange behavior, and Joe tried to cover his tracks but failed. Bobby Briggs discovered that Joe was wearing a wire. The recording device proved that Joe was an undercover police officer who had been infiltrating his organization for 6 months. Briggs pulled a gun and pointed it directly at Joe, knowing he had been betrayed. Joe tried to use his police authority to control the situation. He told Bobby that killing a police officer would result in Briggs being put away forever. The penalties for murdering a cop were so severe that it would guarantee a life sentence with no possibility of parole or escape. Joe thought this logic would protect him and prevent Briggs from pulling the trigger. Bobby Briggs understood the consequences of killing a police officer. He knew that if he shot Joe dead, law enforcement would hunt him down relentlessly, and he would face the maximum possible punishment. However, Briggs also could not let Joe walk away and testify against him with 6 months of recorded evidence. Bobby made a calculated decision. Instead of killing Joe, he shot him in both legs. The gunshots shattered Joe's legs and damaged his spine, paralyzing him from the waist down. Briggs figured that crippling a cop would buy him time to escape without triggering the massive manhunt that would follow a cop killing. Bobby Briggs ran after shooting Joe, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the heroin lab. Joe survived the shooting but lost the use of his legs permanently. The injury ended Joe's ability to walk and changed his entire life. Instead of being a mobile, active police officer, Joe became confined to a wheelchair. Bobby Briggs managed to avoid arrest and went on the run. He successfully evaded law enforcement for 15 years, becoming one of the few criminals who ever got away from Joe Swanson. This failure haunted Joe for over a decade and a half. Joe created the fake Grinch story to cover up what really happened. He probably did this for several reasons. First, the truth made him look incompetent. Getting shot by a drug dealer while working undercover because he accidentally used the wrong name was embarrassing for a supposedly elite police officer. Second, the truth revealed that a major criminal had escaped justice because of Joe's mistake. Bobby Briggs was free because Joe failed his undercover assignment. Third, the Grinch story made Joe seem heroic instead of vulnerable. Getting injured while protecting an orphanage at Christmas was much more noble than getting shot during a botched undercover operation. The lie affected Joe's life in ways that went beyond just his reputation. Joe revealed during the episode that the previous night was the first night in 15 years that he had not strangled Bonnie in his sleep. For 15 years, Joe had been so traumatized and angry about what happened with Bobby Briggs that he would unconsciously attack his wife while having nightmares. Bonnie had endured over a decade of being choked in her sleep by her husband, who was reliving his worst moment over and over in his dreams. This showed how deeply the shooting and Briggs' escape had damaged Joe psychologically. When the news reported that Bobby Briggs had been captured, Joe felt overwhelming relief and happiness. He finally had closure after 15 years of knowing the man who crippled him was walking free. Joe threw a celebration party at his house, inviting all his friends to mark this moment of justice. Everyone gathered to celebrate Bobby Briggs finally being behind bars. Joe was more relaxed and happy than he had been in years, believing the nightmare was finally over. Then Kevin came downstairs with more news from the television. Tom Tucker was reporting breaking news that Bobby Briggs had escaped from police custody. Briggs had been taken to a prison open house, which is apparently a real thing that happens in the Family Guy universe, where prisons let the public tour their facilities while holding dangerous criminals. During this open house, Bobby Briggs managed to escape. The celebration immediately ended as Joe realized his worst enemy was still free. All the relief and happiness disappeared, replaced by the same anger and frustration that had haunted him for 15 years. Joe went to the police chief and demanded to be assigned to the Briggs case. He wanted to be the one to track down Bobby and bring him to justice after all these years. The police chief turned him down, stating that Joe was too close to the case. The chief assigned the job to 2 other police officers instead, officers who did not care about Bobby Briggs at all and had no personal investment in catching him. This was technically the correct decision from a professional standpoint, but it left Joe feeling powerless and frustrated. Back at the Drunken Clam, Joe expressed his despair about the situation. He was depressed that Bobby Briggs had escaped again and that he was not allowed to pursue him. Peter saw his friend's anguish and decided to help. Peter volunteered himself and Quagmire as backup for an unofficial mission to catch Briggs. Quagmire was annoyed about being volunteered without being asked, speaking through gritted teeth and telling Peter not to volunteer him for things like this. Despite his concerns about breaching police protocol, Joe agreed to go after Bobby Briggs with his friends. Joe revealed he had an entire room in his house dedicated to Bobby Briggs. This room was filled with information, clippings, maps, and everything Joe had collected about Briggs over 15 years. The room explained why Kevin and Susie had to share a bedroom despite there being an extra room in the house. Joe had converted the spare room into his obsession chamber, where he tracked every detail about the man who shot him. The guys looked through the information and formulated a plan to track down Bobby Briggs. Before leaving, Quagmire entrusted his cat Principessa to Lois with extremely detailed care instructions. This cat subplot showed Quagmire taking meticulous care of his Persian cat while preparing to help Joe hunt down a dangerous fugitive. Meanwhile, Brian became jealous of the attention the cat received from the family. Chris claimed cats were better than dogs, and Brian injured himself trying to prove that dogs also always land on their feet. Brian even tried to imitate the cat to get attention from Lois, including attempting to knead her breasts while she slept like the cat did. The trio headed to Atlantic City to find Bobby's old girlfriend. They located a stripper named Tanya at a strip club, knowing she was Briggs' only relationship and might know where he was hiding. Joe tried using direct police questioning to get information from Tanya, but his methods failed completely. Quagmire took over, using what he called the Vulcan V meld, a sexual communication technique that allowed him to extract information from strippers. Through this bizarre method, Quagmire got Bobby Briggs' exact address in Atlantic City from Tanya. The 3 easily located Briggs' apartment using the address from Tanya. They entered the apartment and confronted Bobby Briggs. Joe finally had his enemy at his mercy after 15 years of waiting. However, Bobby managed to escape by throwing a blanket into Joe's face. A rooftop chase followed, with Joe pursuing Briggs across buildings. At one point, Joe was dropped several stories but survived by landing directly on his legs, which felt no pain since they were paralyzed. Bobby Briggs escaped by hiding behind a bus from the show Extreme Makeover Home Edition that suddenly appeared, using the television crew as cover to get away. Joe, Peter, and Quagmire were arrested by police officers for interfering with an official investigation. They were handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, seemingly defeated. However, Joe noticed one of the officers' name tags reading Flanagan. Joe recognized Flanagan as one of the corrupt officers who had been helping Bobby Briggs hide for 15 years. These officers had probably arranged the prison open house escape and were now protecting Briggs again. Quagmire used his Swiss Army penis, which had various attachments, including a knife and an acetylene torch, to free them from the handcuffs. They stole the police cruiser and continued their pursuit. Peter revealed he had picked up a phone number from Bobby's apartment and saved it for his trip scrapbook. Joe recognized the area code as belonging to Juarez, Mexico. He deduced that Bobby Briggs was trying to flee the country across the Mexican border. The 3 drove to El Paso, Texas, which sits on the U.S.-Mexico border, to intercept Briggs before he could escape into Mexico. They arrived a couple days before Bobby showed up, giving them time to set up and wait. At the border, they checked traffic until Bobby Briggs arrived. Joe spotted him and gave chase in the stolen police cruiser. The chase ended with Joe getting Bobby at gunpoint near the river that marked the border. Joe had finally caught the man who shot him 15 years ago. He had Bobby Briggs completely at his mercy with a gun pointed at him. Joe stated he had waited years to get Briggs behind bars and finally had his chance for justice. Instead of arresting Bobby or killing him, Joe decided to give him the same treatment Briggs had given him. Joe shot Bobby in both legs, intending to cripple him, just like Briggs had paralyzed Joe years ago. This was Joe's version of justice, an eye for an eye, where Bobby would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, just like Joe had. However, Joe accidentally hit Bobby's femoral artery. The femoral artery is a major blood vessel in the leg, and hitting it causes rapid, catastrophic blood loss. Bobby Briggs bled out within moments and died from the gunshot wound. Joe looked at Bobby's corpse and realized he had killed him. He said he must have hit the femoral artery, causing Briggs to bleed to death. Peter and Quagmire rejoined Joe after hearing the gunshots. Joe was unsure what to do about having killed Bobby Briggs. Even though it was an accident, Quagmire took initiative and kicked Bobby's body into the river, sending the corpse floating into Mexico. This disposal method meant Bobby Briggs technically died in Mexico rather than the United States, potentially avoiding legal complications for Joe. The episode ended with Joe, Peter, and Quagmire back in Quahog. Joe thanked his friends for risking their lives to help him get revenge on Bobby Briggs. Peter and Quagmire noticed blood dripping from Joe's pant leg. Joe explained he had suffered testicular rupture during the fight with Briggs in the river, showing that even in victory, Joe had paid a physical price for his revenge. Despite this injury, Joe had finally achieved closure after 15 years of hunting the man who crippled him, even if that closure came through accidentally killing Bobby rather than bringing him to justice legally. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the fact that Peter discovers his black ancestry through Nate Griffin. Peter discovers his black ancestry through Nate Griffin. Peter Griffin discovered he had a black ancestor, and this revelation sent him on a journey that exposed every awkward racial interaction you could possibly imagine. This episode dealt with identity, ancestry, and what happens when a white guy from Rhode Island finds out his family tree includes a slave. Peter handled this discovery about as well as you'd expect Peter to handle anything, which means he immediately made every situation worse before eventually learning something resembling a lesson. The whole situation started because Chris began talking differently. Chris started using street slang and speaking in a way that concerned Peter. Instead of having a normal conversation with his son about his new vocabulary, Peter jumped to the most extreme conclusion possible. Peter thought Chris was speaking in tongues, like some kind of demonic possession situation. This is classic Peter logic, assuming his teenage son is possessed by demons, rather than just picking up slang from school or television. Peter decided the appropriate response was to perform an exorcism on Chris, because apparently that's a normal parenting technique in the Griffin household. Cleveland Brown witnessed Peter's failed exorcism attempt and offered some actual helpful advice. Cleveland suggested that Peter should try getting Chris to connect with his Irish ancestry instead of assuming supernatural forces were at play. This seemed like reasonable guidance from Cleveland, who was trying to help Peter understand that Chris might just be going through a phase of trying to fit in with his peers. Peter agreed to this plan and decided to take Chris to the Museum of Irish Heritage so he could learn about his family's roots and cultural background. Peter and Chris went to the Museum of Irish Heritage, expecting to discover their proud Irish lineage. However, something at the museum prompted Peter to do more research into his actual family history. Peter and Chris headed to the genealogical section of the Quahog Public Library to trace the Griffin family tree properly. This is where everything changed for Peter. The library records revealed something Peter had never known about his ancestry. The Griffin family had a black ancestor named Nate Griffin. This discovery completely shocked Peter. His entire understanding of his family history got turned upside down by finding out about Nate Griffin. Peter had always assumed his family was entirely Irish, but the genealogical records proved otherwise. Nate Griffin was part of the Griffin family tree, which meant Peter had African American ancestry. This revelation raised questions about how Nate Griffin became part of the family and what his story was. Peter needed more information about Nate Griffin, so he investigated further. He He discovered that Carter Pewterschmidt had a book documenting the Pewterschmidt family history. Peter looked through this book and found references to Nate Griffin within its pages. The book revealed the full truth about Peter's ancestor. Nate Griffin had been a slave. More specifically, Nate Griffin was owned by the Pewterschmidt family. This meant that Peter's wife Lois came from a family that had owned Peter's ancestor. Learning that his ancestor was enslaved by his wife's family gave Peter a wild idea. Peter went to confront his father-in-law, Carter Pewterschmidt, about this historical injustice. Peter demanded reparations from Carter for the Pewterschmidt family's ownership of Nate Griffin. This is peak Peter behavior, finding out about generational trauma and immediately thinking about how he can profit from it. Carter wanted nothing to do with this conversation or the historical implications of his family owning slaves. Carter made Peter an offer to make the whole situation go away. He gave Peter $20,000 with one condition attached. Peter could never mention the matter of Nate Griffin and the Pewterschmidt family's slave ownership again. Carter was essentially paying Peter to shut up about their family's complicated and disturbing historical connection. Peter accepted this deal immediately, taking the money without considering what he should actually do with it or what the money represented. Peter squandered the entire $20,000 on the most ridiculous purchase imaginable. Instead of using the reparations money for something meaningful or helpful, Peter decided to convert the Griffin living room into a complete replica of Pee-wee's Playhouse. For those unfamiliar, Pee-wee's Playhouse was a children's television show from the 1980 seconds featuring a colorful, eccentric set filled with talking furniture and puppets. Peter spent all $20,000 recreating this children's show set in his own house, completely missing the point of what reparations money should represent. This terrible decision angered multiple people in Peter's life. Lois was furious that Peter had wasted $20,000 on converting their living room into a television set replica. The money could have been used for their children's education, home improvements, savings, or literally anything more useful than a Pee-wee's Playhouse recreation. Lois had to live with this ridiculous room taking over her house because Peter made an impulsive decision without consulting her. Peter's wasteful spending also angered his new black brothers. After discovering his black ancestry, Peter had apparently connected with members of the black community in Quahog. These men accepted Peter as their brother based on his connection to Nate Griffin. However, when they saw Peter waste the reparations money on a children's television show set, they were understandably upset. The money represented payment for historical injustice and suffering, and Peter treated it like lottery winnings to spend on whatever random thing caught his attention. Meanwhile, Stewie had his own bizarre subplot happening simultaneously. Stewie attended a basketball game at Buddy Chianci Junior High and became completely obsessed with the cheerleaders. He watched them pump up the audience during the game and came to a strange conclusion. Stewie believed the cheerleaders had mind control powers. He thought they were using some kind of supernatural or psychological technique to manipulate the crowd's emotions and energy. Stewie had experienced the crowd excitement himself and decided the cheerleaders must have special powers causing this effect. Stewie began stalking the cheerleaders to learn their secrets. He followed them around and listened to their private conversations, trying to understand their techniques for crowd control. Stewie adopted their mannerisms and studied their behavior, attempting to understand the source of their supposed powers. His obsession with the cheerleaders led him to increasingly creepy surveillance activities. Stewie spied on the cheerleaders in the locker room at school, hiding and watching them while they practiced. While spying on them, Stewie overheard the lead cheerleader Cindy yelling at the squad. She was angry because the team had messed up their pyramid formation during practice. Stewie analyzed this information and reached a conclusion about the cheerleaders' power source. He decided that the pyramid itself was the source of their mind control abilities. Stewie theorized that standing at the top of the pyramid gave someone the power to control the audience below. He formulated a plan to remove Cindy from her position at the top of the pyramid so he could take her place. At the next basketball game, multiple storylines converged. Peter attended the game, but found himself in an uncomfortable social situation. Both the black and white communities ostracized Peter. The white community no longer fully accepted him because of his black ancestry, while the black community had rejected him for wasting the reparations money on Pee-wee's Playhouse instead of using it responsibly or sharing it with his black brothers. Peter was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither because of his actions and choices. Stewie executed his plan at this same basketball game. He kidnapped Cindy before the cheerleading performance. Stewie bound her with rope, covered her mouth with duct tape to prevent her from screaming, and hid her in the men's bathroom. This is extremely dark behavior, even by Stewie's standards. Kidnapping and restraining a teenage girl to steal her position on a cheerleading pyramid. With Cindy secured in the bathroom, Stewie disguised himself as her and took her position with the cheerleading squad. Stewie climbed to the top of the pyramid during the performance, finally achieving his goal of reaching what he believed was the power position. From the top of the pyramid, Stewie grabbed the megaphone and attempted to use his supposed mind control powers on the audience. Instead of normal cheerleading chants, Stewie commanded the audience to stab each other with knives. This completely unhinged order proved that Stewie fundamentally misunderstood what cheerleaders do, and that they definitely do not have actual mind control powers. The pyramid collapsed, sending Stewie tumbling down. He dropped the megaphone as he fell. While Stewie's plan was falling apart literally, Peter was having a spiritual experience in the bathroom. Peter went to the men's bathroom and began hallucinating. He saw a vision of his ancestor, Nate Griffin, appearing to him. This hallucination felt real to Peter, and Nate began speaking to him about his situation. Nate taught Peter an important lesson about identity and ancestry. He explained to Peter that having a black ancestor did not fundamentally change who Peter was or define him completely. Nate encouraged Peter to do something positive with the reparations money instead of keeping it selfishly or wasting it on frivolous purchases. This ghostly advice from his ancestor gave Peter a moment of clarity. Nate helped Peter understand that the money represented something bigger than just a payout from Carter. It symbolized acknowledgement of historical injustice and suffering, and Peter had a responsibility to treat it with respect. Peter emerged from the bathroom and picked up the megaphone that Stewie had dropped. He used it to address the entire audience at the basketball game. Peter announced that he had made a mistake in how he handled the reparations money. He admitted that converting his living room into Pee-wee's Playhouse was wasteful and selfish. Peter declared that he would be sharing his reparation money with his brothers, showing he had learned something from Nate's advice. Peter threw the money onto the basketball court. Cash scattered across the floor as both black and white audience members rushed forward to grab it. People dove for the bills, creating chaos on the court as everyone tried to collect free money. This was not exactly what Peter had intended when he said he would share the money. Seeing both races grabbing the cash, Peter clarified his statement through the megaphone. He announced that he meant the money was only for his black brothers, not for everyone in attendance. The closing scene provided a disturbing punchline to Stewie's subplot. Quagmire entered the men's bathroom and discovered Cindy still bound and gagged in the bathroom stall. Instead of being concerned about the kidnapped teenager or calling for help, Quagmire was delighted by finding a helpless young woman. He exclaimed, "Dear Diary, jackpot," showing his predatory excitement about the situation. This ending was classic inappropriate Quagmire behavior, finding something exciting about a scenario that should have prompted concern and immediate assistance. The episode explored themes of racial identity, ancestry, and reparations through Peter's discovery of Nate Griffin. Peter's journey from thinking he was purely Irish to learning about his black ancestry revealed how people connect with their heritage. His initial reaction was to try profiting from this discovery rather than understanding its deeper meaning. Peter treated the reparations money as a windfall to spend on entertainment rather than recognizing it as acknowledgement of historical injustice. The episode showed how Peter struggled with belonging after discovering his mixed heritage. Neither the white nor black communities fully accepted him because he failed to understand the significance of his ancestry. Peter made mistakes by wasting the money and treating his connection to Nate Griffin as something to exploit rather than honor. Only through his hallucination of Nate did Peter begin to understand that having black ancestry meant taking on some responsibility to respect that heritage. Stewie's parallel story about the cheerleaders satirized obsession and misunderstanding of social dynamics. His belief that cheerleaders had mind control powers and that a pyramid formation granted supernatural abilities showed how Stewie's intelligence did not extend to understanding normal human social interactions. His kidnapping plot was extreme even for his character, demonstrating how far he would go based on completely flawed premises about how the world works. The episode dealt with sensitive subject matter including slavery, racial identity, and reparations. Peter's discovery that his wife's family owned his ancestor created an awkward family dynamic that connected historical injustice to present-day relationships. Carter paying Peter to never mention it again reflected how some people prefer to ignore uncomfortable historical truths rather than confronting them honestly. Peter Griffin discovering his black ancestry through Nate Griffin became a storyline about how people handle learning unexpected truths about their heritage. Peter's mistakes and eventual attempt to share the money showed his character growth within the episode, even if his methods remained questionable. The revelation that Nate Griffin was a slave owned by the Pewterschmidts added layers of complexity to Peter and Lois's relationship, connecting their families through one of America's darkest historical periods. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that Meg becomes violent and dominant after getting out of prison. Meg becomes violent and dominant after prison. Meg Griffin went to prison and came back as a completely different person, proving that the American correctional system absolutely does not rehabilitate anyone. This episode showed what happens when the most abused member of the Griffin family finally snaps after years of mistreatment. Meg's transformation from doormat to dangerous individual happened because she made one bad decision to help a prison pen pal, and then prison made her realize she was done taking abuse from everyone around her. The episode started with Peter joining a rodeo, because Peter's decision-making skills have always been flawless. Peter thought he was ready for professional rodeo competition after practicing his bull riding skills at home. His practice subjects were Meg and Chris, who he rode like animals while they crawled around on all hands and knees. Peter, treating his children like livestock to prepare for a rodeo, was standard Griffin family dynamics, showing the casual abuse that happened daily in that household. Peter believed this practice made him qualified to compete against actual rodeo professionals. Peter entered the rodeo competition and immediately discovered he was completely unprepared. He found himself overmatched when he encountered what the episode described as a bear of a bull. This massive, aggressive bull was far beyond Peter's skill level. Peter got thrown around and beaten up by the bull, learning the hard way that riding your teenagers around the living room does not translate to actual rodeo skills. Peter's rodeo failure was a minor subplot that showed his usual pattern of overestimating his abilities and suffering painful consequences. Brian's storyline intersected with Meg's in a way that would change everything for the Griffin family's most ignored daughter. Brian made the acquaintance of an editor for Teen People magazine. This editor offered Brian a writing gig, which excited Brian since he constantly sought validation as a writer. The assignment was to write about the average American teenage girl. Brian needed a subject for his article, and he decided to follow Meg as his example of a typical teenager. Brian began shadowing Meg to gather material for his Teen People article. He watched her daily routine and followed her movements to understand what average teenage girls did with their time. During his surveillance, Brian discovered something unexpected about Meg's activities. She was sneaking off to the Quahog Adult Correctional Institute regularly. Brian found that Meg was going to the prison to converse with an inmate. This prisoner had become Meg's friend through a pen pal program. Meg had apparently joined some kind of pen pal program where civilians could write letters to prison inmates. Through this program, she started corresponding with one particular prisoner. Their letter exchanges developed into what Meg considered a friendship. She had been visiting him at the prison to continue their conversations in person. Meg kept these visits secret from her family, knowing they would disapprove of her befriending a convicted criminal. This was probably the most exciting thing happening in Meg's life, which says a lot about how boring and lonely her existence was. Brian made a decision that would have serious consequences for Meg. He ratted her out to the Griffin family, telling Peter and Lois about Meg's prison visits. Brian betrayed Meg's trust because he thought the family should know their daughter was associating with a criminal. The family reacted exactly as Meg had feared they would. Peter and Lois did not want Meg talking with the inmate anymore. They forbade her from visiting the prison or continuing any contact with her pen pal friend. Meg was upset about losing this friendship, but as usual, nobody in the Griffin family cared about what Meg wanted. The situation escalated dramatically when the inmate escaped from Quahog Adult Correctional Institute. After breaking out of prison, he went straight to Meg. The escaped prisoner came to the Griffin house looking for Meg, probably because she was the only person who had shown him kindness and friendship. Meg found herself face to face with an escaped convict who had come to her home. Peter discovered the escaped prisoner at their house and immediately alerted Joe Swanson. Joe responded to Peter's call and showed up to capture the escaped inmate. As a Quahog police officer, Joe arrested the escaped prisoner and returned him to custody. However, the legal consequences did not end with just the inmate's recapture. The authorities determined that Meg had aided the escaped prisoner by allowing him to come to her house. She was charged as an accessory to his escape. The legal system decided that Meg's involvement, even if it was just the prisoner showing up at her house, made her criminally liable. Meg Griffin went to prison. The episode did not specify exactly how long she served, but it was long enough to completely change her personality and outlook on life. Meg experienced the Quahog Adult Correctional Institute from the inside as an actual inmate rather than a visitor. She lived in a cell, followed prison rules, dealt with guards, and interacted with other prisoners. Whatever happened to Meg during her incarceration transformed her fundamentally as a person. When Meg returned home from prison, the family immediately noticed she was different. Meg was harder and meaner than she had been before. Prison had toughened her up and given her a new perspective on how she allowed people to treat her. She carried herself differently, spoke differently, and reacted to situations with aggression rather than her usual passive acceptance. The meek, constantly bullied Meg was gone, replaced by someone who would not tolerate disrespect anymore. Meg's transformation came from years of built-up resentment finally reaching a breaking point. She had spent her entire life being mistreated by her family. Peter constantly mocked her appearance and existence. Lois ignored her or criticized her. Chris and Stewie joined in the family sport of abusing Meg. Even Brian, who sometimes showed her kindness, had betrayed her trust by revealing her prison visits to the family. Prison gave Meg time to think about all the abuse she had endured, and she decided she was done being everyone's punching bag. Fed up with everything, Meg made a drastic decision. She decided to hold up Goldman's pharmacy to get money so she could leave Quahog and her terrible family behind. Meg was planning an armed robbery to fund her escape from the life she hated. This showed how far prison had changed her, turning her from someone who accepted abuse quietly into someone willing to commit violent crimes to change her circumstances. Meg was ready to rob Mort Goldman's pharmacy at gunpoint, which would have added another serious felony to her record. Brian intervened before Meg could execute her robbery plan. He confronted Meg at the pharmacy and tried to talk her down from committing this crime. During their conversation, Brian discovered the real reason behind Meg's actions. Meg believed that nobody cared about her at all. She thought her entire family and everyone in her life saw her as worthless and unimportant. This belief drove her to the point where she was willing to throw away her future because she felt she had nothing worth staying for. Brian proved Meg wrong by showing her something he had created. He revealed the story he had written about her for Teen People magazine. Brian had completed his assignment about the average American teenage girl using Meg as his subject. The article he wrote was not mocking or critical. Instead, Brian's story showed that he genuinely cared about Meg just as she was. He had written something that portrayed her with kindness and understanding, capturing who she really was rather than the punching bag version the family usually saw. Meg was deeply touched by Brian's article. Reading his words about her made her realize that at least one person in her life actually cared about her well-being. Brian's article proved he had been paying attention to who she was as a person, not just observing her to gather material for a magazine piece. This act of genuine kindness and recognition broke through Meg's hardened prison exterior. She realized that maybe her life was not completely hopeless if someone could see value in her. Meg abandoned her plan to rob the pharmacy. Brian's intervention and the article he wrote saved her from adding armed robbery to her criminal record. Meg returned to normal relations with her family, going back to her usual position in the household. The prison-hardened version of Meg disappeared, replaced by the familiar doormat who accepted whatever treatment the Griffins dished out. She reverted to her old self, allowing the cycle of abuse to continue as it always had. The episode dealt with themes of loneliness, desperation, and the effects of mistreatment on a person's mental state. Meg's friendship with a prison inmate highlighted how isolated and desperate for connection she was. The fact that she found companionship with a convicted criminal through a pen pal program showed that Meg was so starved for attention and kindness that she would accept it from literally anyone who offered it. Her family provided so little emotional support that a stranger in prison became her friend. Meg's transformation after prison demonstrated how incarceration changes people, usually not for the better. She came out harder, angrier, and more willing to use violence to solve her problems. Prison did not rehabilitate Meg or help her become a better person. Instead, it gave her time to stew in her resentment and emerge ready to lash out at the world that had mistreated her. Her plan to commit armed robbery showed that prison taught her crime was an acceptable solution rather than reforming her behavior. Brian's role in the story was complicated and morally questionable. He betrayed Meg's trust by telling her family about the prison visits, which directly led to the chain of events that landed Meg in jail. Brian's decision to rat her out came from concern, but it resulted in Meg going to prison and emerging as a dangerous, angry person ready to commit violent crimes. However, Brian also ultimately saved Meg by showing her his article and proving someone cared about her. The episode highlighted the casual cruelty of the Griffin family dynamic. Peter literally rode Meg and Chris like animals to practice for a rodeo, treating his children as less than human. This kind of behavior happened constantly in the Griffin household, creating an environment where Meg felt worthless and unloved. The family's years of mistreatment directly contributed to Meg's willingness to befriend a prison inmate and later to commit armed robbery. Their abuse had consequences, even if those consequences usually got resolved by the end of each episode. Meg's return to normalcy at the end represented the show's status quo, reasserting itself. Despite experiencing a major life change through incarceration and nearly committing armed robbery, Meg went back to being the family's verbal punching bag. The episode suggested that one moment of kindness from Brian was enough to undo all the anger and resentment Meg had built up. This resolution was unrealistic but necessary to maintain the show's usual family dynamics for future episodes. The story explored how far someone can be pushed before they snap. Meg had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from her family and peers. Prison became the breaking point where she decided she would no longer accept this treatment. Her transformation into a harder, meaner person showed what happens when someone who has been beaten down finally decides to fight back. Meg was ready to use violence and crime to escape her situation, demonstrating how desperate she had become. Brian's article for Teen People represented the power of being seen and understood. Meg had spent her entire life feeling invisible and worthless to everyone around her. Reading an article where someone had actually paid attention to who she was and found value in her existence gave Meg hope that maybe she mattered after all. This recognition pulled her back from the edge and made her reconsider throwing her life away through crime. The episode's message seemed to be that everyone needs at least one person who genuinely cares about them. Meg was ready to become a criminal and abandon her family because she believed nobody cared whether she existed or not. Brian's article proved this belief wrong and gave Meg a reason to stay and try to make her life work. However, the episode did not address the underlying problem of the family's constant abuse, suggesting Meg would continue suffering the same mistreatment that nearly drove her to armed robbery. Meg Griffin's brief stint in prison and subsequent violent transformation showed a darker side of the usually lighthearted animated sitcom. The episode explored serious themes, including the criminal justice system, the psychological effects of abuse, and how desperation can drive people to crime. Meg's journey from doormat to dangerous and back to doormat again highlighted the cyclical nature of abuse in the Griffin household and questioned whether anything would ever really change for Quahog's most mistreated teenager. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the fact that Stewie creates evil Stewie and eventually kills him. Stewie creates evil Stewie and kills him. Stewie Griffin created an evil clone of himself through a scientific experiment gone wrong, and the result was a murderous rampage that ended with Brian shooting one of the two identical Stewies. This storyline showed what happens when you try to artificially enhance your dark side using a neural enhancement device built in your bedroom. Stewie learned the hard way that sometimes your evil personality is better left integrated into your regular personality rather than walking around as a separate murderous baby. The whole situation started at the park when Stewie tried to get revenge on an older boy who had insulted him. Stewie pulled out his gun, ready to shoot this kid for whatever disrespectful thing he had said. This was standard Stewie behavior, responding to minor slights with attempted murder using advanced weaponry. However, when Stewie pulled the trigger, his gun misfired. The weapon failed to fire, leaving Stewie standing there holding a useless gun, while the older boy presumably walked away unharmed. This mechanical failure embarrassed Stewie and prevented him from getting his revenge. Stewie interpreted the gun malfunction as a sign of something deeper going wrong with him. He believed he was losing his edge as an evil genius baby. The fact that his weapon had failed at a critical moment made Stewie question whether he was still the dangerous, ruthless villain he always thought himself to be. This crisis of confidence bothered Stewie deeply. He had built his entire identity around being evil, intelligent, and dangerous. A misfiring gun suggested maybe he was losing the qualities that made him special and terrifying. Stewie decided he needed to boost his evil side artificially to get back to his peak villainous form. He built a neural enhancement device designed to amplify his evil personality traits. Stewie thought this machine would restore his edge and make him even more dangerous than before. The device was supposed to enhance the evil already present in Stewie's brain, making him feel more ruthless and capable of the violence and schemes he regularly attempted. Building complex scientific equipment was easy for Stewie, who regularly created time machines, mind control devices, and advanced weaponry, despite being a baby. Stewie activated the neural enhancement device on himself. The machine started working, but not in the way Stewie had planned or expected. Instead of simply amplifying the evil within Stewie's existing personality, the device did something much more extreme. The machine took all of Stewie's evilness and concentrated it into a separate entity. The neural enhancement device extracted the dark parts of Stewie's personality and used them to create a physical clone. This clone was essentially all of Stewie's worst qualities and violent impulses given physical form as an independent being. The evil Stewie clone was immediately violent and dangerous. Its first action after being created was attacking Brian. The clone went after Brian without any provocation or reason beyond pure malicious intent. Evil Stewie attempted to choke Brian, wrapping his hands around the dog's throat and trying to strangle him. This unprovoked attack showed that the clone had no restraint or reasoning ability, just pure aggression and desire to cause harm. Brian fought back against the choking, trying to escape from the murderous baby clone. The evil clone escalated its violence against Brian by cutting off his tail. Using some kind of sharp implement, the evil Stewie severed Brian's tail from his body. This was an act of gratuitous cruelty that served no purpose except causing pain and disfigurement. Brian lost his tail because Stewie's machine had created a monster that enjoyed hurting others. The tail cutting showed the clone was not just violent, but sadistic, taking pleasure in mutilating its victims. When Stewie discovered the clone existed, he realized his neural enhancement device had gone horribly wrong. Instead of making himself more evil, Stewie had accidentally created a separate evil version of himself that was now loose and dangerous. Stewie tried to confront his evil clone, probably hoping to control it or shut it down. However, the evil clone immediately attacked Stewie as well. The clone saw regular Stewie as just another target for violence, showing no recognition or loyalty to its creator. Evil Stewie attacked regular Stewie with the same aggression it had shown Brian. The evil clone managed to escape from Stewie and Brian. It got away from the house and went out into Quahog, where it began a killing spree. The clone's first confirmed murder victim was a woman. Evil Stewie killed this woman, though the episode did not specify exactly how the murder occurred. This marked the clone's transition from attacking Brian and Stewie to killing random innocent people. The evil clone was now a genuine threat to everyone in Quahog, not just the Griffin household. The evil Stewie clone continued its rampage by targeting the Kool-Aid Man. The Kool-Aid Man was the giant anthropomorphic pitcher of red fruit drink who famously burst through walls yelling his catchphrase. Evil Stewie lured the Kool-Aid Man into some kind of trap or ambush. The clone killed the Kool-Aid Man, which meant destroying or breaking the pitcher character. After killing him, Evil Stewie gleefully drank the Kool-Aid Man's contents. The clone consumed the red liquid that made up the Kool-Aid Man's body, drinking him while apparently enjoying the act. This was both murder and cannibalism in a twisted way, showing how depraved the evil clone had become. Stewie and Brian realized they needed to stop the evil clone before it killed more people. They came up with a plan to lure evil Stewie into a trap. Their plan involved using Brian as bait. They tied Brian up, restraining him so he could not escape. The idea was that evil Stewie would be attracted to the opportunity to hurt Brian again, since the clone had already attacked him once. A helpless, tied-up Brian would be an irresistible target for the evil clone. Stewie and Brian waited for the evil clone to show up and fall into their trap. The plan worked. Evil Stewie arrived at the location where Brian was tied up. The clone showed up carrying a ray gun, some kind of energy weapon that Stewie had built at some point. Evil Stewie intended to shoot Brian with this ray gun, probably planning to kill or seriously injure him. The clone approached Brian with the weapon, ready to execute the helpless dog. This was the moment Stewie had been waiting for, the opportunity to ambush his evil clone while it was distracted. Stewie leaped onto the evil clone, attacking it physically. Regular Stewie jumped on evil Stewie's back or tackled him, engaging in hand-to-hand combat with his darker self. The two Stewies fought violently, struggling against each other. During their fight, they tore off each other's clothes. The battle was so intense that both Stewies ended up partially or completely naked from ripping away their identical red overalls and white shirts. The clothing destruction showed how vicious the fight had become. During the struggle between the two Stewies, Brian managed to get control of the ray gun. He grabbed the weapon that evil Stewie had been carrying, taking possession of the only gun in the situation. Brian now had the power to end the conflict by shooting the evil clone. However, Brian faced a serious problem. He was looking at two identical naked Stewies, and he could not tell which one was the real Stewie and which one was the evil clone. They looked exactly the same because the clone was a perfect physical copy of Stewie. Brian needed a way to identify which Stewie was which before shooting. He could not just guess because he might accidentally kill the real Stewie and leave the evil clone alive. Brian came up with a test to distinguish between them. He instructed both Stewies to look at their feet. This seemed like a random instruction, but Brian was using it to observe their reactions and behaviors. He watched carefully to see how each Stewie would respond to being told to look down at their own feet. One of the Stewies looked at his feet and started giggling. This Stewie found something amusing or entertaining about looking at his own feet, laughing in a childlike way. The giggling reaction helped Brian identify this Stewie as the real one. Regular Stewie apparently had a playful side that would find humor in the situation or in looking at his feet. The other Stewie did not giggle, maintaining a more serious or aggressive demeanor. Brian used this difference in reaction to make his decision about which one to shoot. Brian shot the Stewie who did not giggle. He aimed the ray gun at the non-giggling Stewie and fired, hitting him with the energy weapon. This Stewie was presumably the evil clone based on Brian's reasoning that the real Stewie would have giggled. The ray gun killed or destroyed the evil clone, ending its murder spree. Brian, Stewie, and the audience believed that Brian had made the correct choice and shot the evil version rather than the real Stewie. After the shooting, Brian and Stewie walked away from the scene together. The remaining Stewie appeared to be the real, non-evil version who had giggled at his feet. They seemed relieved that the evil clone situation was resolved and they could return to normal life. However, the episode included a disturbing final moment that suggested something was wrong. As Brian and Stewie walked away, the remaining Stewie looked back over his shoulder. When Stewie looked back, his eyes had changed. Instead of his normal white eyes with black pupils, Stewie's eyes were yellow and monstrous looking. The yellow eyes suggested something demonic or evil about him. Along with the eye color change, maniacal laughter was heard. Someone was laughing in a crazy, evil way, and the timing suggested it was Stewie producing this sound. The combination of yellow eyes and maniacal laughter strongly implied that Brian had shot the wrong Stewie. This ending twist suggested that the evil clone had survived by tricking Brian. The evil Stewie must have been the one who giggled at his feet, correctly predicting that Brian would interpret giggling as a sign of the real Stewie's personality. The evil clone used this reverse psychology to make Brian shoot the real Stewie instead. Now, evil Stewie was walking around pretending to be regular Stewie, with Brian having no idea he had killed his friend and was now living with a murderous clone. The episode left this twist ambiguous and unresolved. Future episodes showed regular Stewie continuing to exist and behave normally, suggesting either the evil clone twist was not permanent or the show simply ignored this storyline in later episodes. Family Guy often featured dramatic events that got forgotten or contradicted by subsequent episodes. The evil Stewie clone storyline became one of those one-off plots that created a disturbing ending without affecting the show's long-term continuity. The evil Stewie story explored themes of nature versus nurture and what happens when you try to separate different aspects of your personality. Stewie thought his evil side was something he could enhance or control through technology. Instead, he learned that his evil impulses were dangerous when concentrated and given independent existence. The neural enhancement device showed the risks of trying to artificially modify personality traits without understanding the consequences. The clone represented all of Stewie's worst qualities without any of his positive traits to balance them out. Regular Stewie was violent and dangerous, but he also had moments of vulnerability, friendship with Brian, and capacity for empathy. Evil Stewie was pure aggression and cruelty with no redeeming qualities. This contrast showed that even Stewie's dark personality was tempered by other aspects of his character. When those moderating influences were removed, the result was an unstoppable killing machine. Brian's difficulty identifying which Stewie to shoot highlighted how subtle the differences between good and evil can be. The two Stewies looked identical and presumably sounded the same when speaking. Brian had to rely on a behavioral test about feet giggling to make his choice. This showed that distinguishing between someone's true self and their worst impulses is not always obvious or easy. The twist ending suggested Brian got it wrong, falling for the evil clone's manipulation. The Kool-Aid Man's death was particularly dark humor, even for Family Guy. The show took a beloved advertising mascot and had him murdered by an evil baby who then drank his corpse. This represented Family Guy's tendency to take innocent childhood icons and subject them to violence or disturbing scenarios. The image of Stewie gleefully drinking the Kool-Aid Man's contents after killing him was both horrifying and absurdly funny in the show's twisted way. Stewie's crisis about losing his edge reflected a deeper insecurity about his identity. He built his entire sense of self around being evil and dangerous. When his gun misfired, Stewie interpreted it as evidence he was becoming soft or weak. This insecurity drove him to take drastic action with the neural enhancement device. Stewie's need to prove his evilness ultimately created a situation more dangerous than anything he had done intentionally. The episodes ending with the yellow eyes suggested evil never truly leaves or can be fully destroyed. Even after Brian shot what he thought was the evil clone, evil Stewie remained. This implied that darkness is persistent and can disguise itself as normalcy. The maniacal laughter and yellow eyes showed evil was still present, just better hidden. Whether this was meant as a serious plot point or just a creepy ending joke remained unclear. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that Family Guy was canceled twice and revived by DVD sales. Family Guy was canceled twice and revived by DVD sales. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999 with the best possible lead-in any show could hope for. Fox scheduled the pilot episode Death Has a Shadow to air immediately after Super Bowl X. This was a coveted time slot that guaranteed massive viewership because millions of people were already watching Fox for the football game. The Super Bowl premiere strategy worked perfectly, bringing in 22 million viewers for Family Guy's first episode. Seth MacFarlane's animated sitcom about Peter Griffin and his family received positive reviews despite controversy over its adult content and provocative humor. MacFarlane had pitched Family Guy to Fox after creating two animated shorts called The Life of Larry and Larry and Steve. He redesigned the protagonist Larry and his dog Steve, renaming them Peter and Brian. Fox president of alternative programming Mike Darnell gave MacFarlane about $40,000 to create a pilot after being impressed by his pitch, which included MacFarlane doing all the voices himself. Darnell said he thought MacFarlane was either crazy or a genius, and it turned out he was a genius. Fox greenlit the show for 13 episodes, giving MacFarlane his shot at creating a primetime animated series. The first season started strong, with regular episodes beginning in April 1999. Family Guy aired on Sunday nights alongside established Fox hits like The Simpsons and The X-Files. This was a safe, successful time slot that gave the new show the best chance to build an audience. Season 1 averaged 12.8 million households tuning in, which ranked it 33rd in the Nielsen ratings. These numbers were decent for a new animated sitcom, showing Family Guy had potential to become a long-term success if Fox treated it properly. Fox did not treat Family Guy properly. When Season 2 began in September 1999, the network made a catastrophic decision by moving the show to Thursday nights. This new time slot pit Family Guy directly against NBC's Frasier, one of the most popular sitcoms on television. Frasier was in its prime, winning Emmy Awards and dominating Thursday night viewership. Family Guy stood absolutely no chance competing against Frasier's established audience. The ratings dropped immediately and dramatically as viewers chose the NBC comedy over Fox's new animated show. Fox responded to the ratings drop by making things even worse. Instead of moving Family Guy back to a better time slot, the network started broadcasting episodes at completely inconsistent times. The show went on hiatus for 3 months between September and December, then disappeared for another 3 months between December and March. These long breaks killed any momentum the show might have built. Viewers could not follow a show that kept vanishing from the schedule for months at a time. When Family Guy returned in March 2000, Fox moved it to Tuesday nights. The Tuesday time slot created a new disaster. Family Guy now competed against ABC's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, a game show phenomenon that was dominating television ratings across all demographics. Millionaire was one of the biggest hits on television, pulling in massive audiences that made competing shows struggle. Family Guy's ratings continued falling as viewers chose the game show over the animated sitcom. Fox had now placed Family Guy against two of the most popular shows on television in 2 different time slots, essentially setting the series up for failure. Fox officially canceled Family Guy in May 2000, ending the show after its 2nd season. The network had bounced the show around 6 or 7 different time slots over the course of roughly 1 year, never giving it a stable schedule where audiences could find it consistently. Family Guy finished Season 2 ranked 114th in the Nielsen ratings, a massive drop from its 33rd place finish in Season 1. The constant time slot changes and competition against powerhouse shows made it impossible for Family Guy to maintain its audience. However, Family Guy received a last-minute reprieve from cancellation. Fox decided to bring the show back for a third season in 2001. This decision gave MacFarlane and his team another chance to prove the show deserved to stay on the air. The third season aired in 2001, but Fox's confidence in the show remained low. During the third season, Fox announced that Family Guy was canceled for good. This time, there would be no reprieve or second chance. The network decided to permanently end the series after 50 episodes across 3 seasons. Fox tried to sell the rights for reruns of Family Guy to other networks and cable channels. The network expected interest from syndication buyers who could air the existing episodes, while Fox moved on to other programming. However, finding networks interested in buying Family Guy proved extremely difficult. Most networks and cable channels did not see value in a canceled animated sitcom that had struggled in the ratings. Fox executives reportedly had trouble convincing anyone to purchase the syndication rights at any price. According to the president of 20th Century Fox Television, Cartoon Network eventually bought the rights, basically for free. Cartoon Network began airing Family Guy reruns on its Adult Swim programming block starting the 20th of April, 2003. Adult Swim was Cartoon Network's late-night block aimed at adult viewers, featuring mature animated content that did not fit the children's programming shown during daytime hours. Nobody expected Family Guy to perform particularly well on Adult Swim. The show was just cheap programming to fill time slots during late-night hours when viewership numbers are typically low. This assumption turned out to be completely wrong. Family Guy immediately became Adult Swim's top-rated program. The show dominated late-night viewing in its time slot, beating both cable and broadcast competition. Adult Swim's viewership increased by 239% thanks to Family Guy reruns. The show averaged 1.9 million viewers per episode on Adult Swim, numbers that shocked both Cartoon Network and Fox executives. Suddenly, this canceled sitcom that nobody wanted was generating massive ratings on cable television. Family Guy had found its audience, just not on Fox's broadcast schedule. The same week, Family Guy premiered on Adult Swim in April 2003. Fox released the complete first and second seasons on DVD. This was packaged as Family Guy Volume 1, a 4-disc DVD box set distributed by 20th Century Fox Television. The DVD set included episode commentaries, behind-the-scenes footage, and online promo spots as bonus content. Fox hoped the DVD would sell reasonably well to fans who remembered the show from its original broadcast run. The actual sales numbers exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Family Guy sold 400,000 DVD copies within 1 month of release. This was an extraordinary number for a canceled television show. Most TV shows on DVD sold far fewer copies, especially shows that had been off the air for over a year. But Family Guy kept selling. By the end of 2003, DVD sales reached 2.2 million copies. This made Family Guy the best-selling television DVD of 2003. It also became the second highest-selling television DVD of all time, beaten only by the first season of Comedy Central's Chappelle's Show. The combination of Adult Swim's high ratings and massive DVD sales created an unprecedented situation. Family Guy had become a cult phenomenon while canceled. The show had built a larger, more devoted audience in syndication and on DVD than it ever had during its original Fox broadcast run. Fans were buying DVDs by the millions and tuning into Adult Swim by the hundreds of thousands to watch a show Fox had given up on. The third season DVD release also sold over 1 million copies, proving the show's popularity was not a fluke. Fox executives noticed these numbers and realized they had made a massive mistake by canceling Family Guy. The network saw that an animated sitcom they owned was generating enormous ratings and DVD revenue, but not on their network. Adult Swim was benefiting from Family Guy's success, while Fox got nothing except DVD sales profits. Network president Gail Berman later said that canceling Family Guy was one of her most difficult decisions, and she was happy the show would return. On the 20th of May, 2004, Fox made television history by ordering 35 new episodes of Family Guy. This marked the first time a television show had been revived, based primarily on DVD sales. Other shows had been revived before, but usually because of network deals, streaming success, or fan campaigns on social media. Family Guy came back because people bought physical DVDs in numbers large enough to prove the show had commercial viability. Steve Feldstein, former Fox Home Entertainment executive, told the New York Times that there was this fan base that was lying dormant. That base brought a whole new group with it, and that the DVD sales led the network to take a second look. Family Guy's fourth season premiered on the 1st of May 2005 with the episode North by North Quahog. 3 years had passed since the show's second cancellation. The premiere drew 11.85 million viewers, a strong number that proved Fox had made the right decision bringing the show back. MacFarlane wrote and directed the premiere episode himself. He believed the 3-year hiatus was actually beneficial for the show because animated series do not normally take breaks. MacFarlane noted that by the end of regular seasons, you see a lot more sex jokes and bodily function jokes and signs of a fatigued staff that their brains are just fried. The break gave the writing staff time to recharge. The premiere episode included meta-humor about the cancellation. Peter Griffin told his family they had been canceled because Fox needed room in their schedule for shows like Dark Angel, Titus, Undeclared, Action, That 80 Seconds, Show, Wonderfalls, Fastlane. Andy Richter Controls the Universe, Skin, Girls Club, Cracking Up, The Pits, Firefly, Get Real, Freaky Links, Wanda at Large, Costello, The Lone Gunman, A Minute with Stan Hooper, Normal Ohio, Pasadena, Harsh Realm, Keen Eddie, The Street, The American Embassy, Cedric the Entertainer Presents, The Tick, Luis, and Greg the Bunny. Peter then said maybe if all those shows failed, Family Guy would have a chance. This joke acknowledged that Fox had canceled Family Guy to make room for shows that also got canceled, making Fox's decision look even more foolish in retrospect. Fox gave Family Guy a much safer time slot for its revival. The show aired on Sunday nights after The Simpsons, inheriting the lead-in audience from Fox's most successful animated series. This was the time slot Family Guy should have kept after season 1, instead of being bounced around to Thursday and Tuesday nights. With a stable schedule and strong lead-in, Family Guy thrived. The show maintained consistent ratings and became a reliable success for Fox. Family Guy's resurrection changed television history in multiple ways. It proved that DVD sales could generate enough revenue to justify reviving a canceled show. It demonstrated that syndication ratings on cable television mattered more than networks previously thought. It showed that a show could find its audience after cancellation if given the right platform. The DVD market had real power to influence network decisions, something that was relatively new in the early 2000s. The revival also led to Family Guy becoming a cultural phenomenon. In 2009, the show was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series. This was extremely rare for an animated sitcom. The last time an animated series had been nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series before Family Guy was The Flintstones in 1961. Family Guy also spawned multiple DVD releases, merchandise, toy lines, video games, and eventually 3 Star Wars parody specials that were released as their own DVDs. MacFarlane's success with Family Guy led to Fox giving him additional shows. American Dad premiered in 2005, airing directly after Family Guy on Sunday nights. This gave MacFarlane 2 shows in Fox's Sunday lineup. Later, MacFarlane would create The Cleveland Show, a Family Guy spin-off, giving him 3 animated series on Fox simultaneously. MacFarlane also voiced multiple characters across all 3 shows, making him one of the most prolific voice actors on television. The story of Family Guy's cancellations represents both network incompetence and the power of fan devotion. Fox mishandled the show during its original run by constantly changing time slots and putting it against impossible competition. However, fans kept watching on Adult Swim and bought DVDs in massive numbers, proving the show deserved to exist. The dormant fan base that DVD executive Steve Feldstein mentioned brought Family Guy back from the dead through sheer commercial support. This story would be impossible to replicate today. Physical media sales have collapsed as streaming services dominate entertainment consumption. Major retailers like Best Buy have stopped selling DVDs entirely. Cable television viewership continues declining as people cut cords and switch to streaming platforms. The specific circumstances that saved Family Guy, strong syndication ratings on cable and massive physical media sales, no longer exist in the modern entertainment landscape. Family Guy might be the only show ever revived, primarily because people bought millions of DVDs. Family Guy has now aired over 400 episodes across more than 20 seasons, making it one of the longest-running animated series in television history. The show that Fox canceled twice has outlasted most of the programs that replaced it on the schedule. Family Guy survived and thrived, while shows like Dark Angel, Titus, Undeclared, and dozens of others that Peter listed got canceled and forgotten. The show that was basically given away for free to Cartoon Network became one of Fox's most valuable properties, generating ratings, merchandise sales, and cultural relevance for over 2 decades. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that the evil monkey is revealed to be misunderstood and eventually finds a family. The evil monkey is revealed to be misunderstood and later finds a family. Chris Griffin's imaginary evil monkey turned out to be real, misunderstood, and eventually became part of another family after a dramatic rescue from an android Hannah Montana. This episode revealed that the monkey Chris had been seeing in his closet for years was not a hallucination, but an actual creature living in his room who just happened to be going through personal problems. The story combined Chris finally proving the monkey existed with Stewie's obsession with teen pop star Miley Cyrus, who turned out to be a Disney-manufactured robot programmed to be the perfect teen idol. The episode started with Chris getting another D on a test. Chris blamed the evil monkey for his poor grade, claiming the monkey's presence in his room distracted him from studying. The Griffin family was completely tired of hearing Chris talk about this monkey. Chris was no longer a small child but a teenager, and his family thought he was too old to still be making up stories about imaginary creatures living in his closet. They told Chris the evil monkey was all in his imagination and that he needed to stop using this excuse for his failures at school. Meanwhile, Stewie discovered that Hannah Montana was coming to perform at the Quahog Civic Center. Stewie wanted to get tickets to see her show desperately. He tried to purchase tickets, but they sold out extremely quickly, leaving Stewie without any way to see his favorite performer. Brian initially teased Stewie about his obsession with Hannah Montana, mocking him for being such a big fan of a teen pop star. However, Stewie finally opened up to Brian and admitted how much he genuinely loved Hannah Montana and her music. Stewie's sincere confession about his fandom made Brian feel sympathetic. Brian reluctantly agreed to help Stewie find a way to meet Hannah Montana despite the sold-out show. Chris decided to prove once and for all that the evil monkey was real. He set up a camera in his room to capture video evidence of the monkey's existence. Chris thought this surveillance footage would finally vindicate him and prove to his family that he had been telling the truth all along. The camera did record various activities in Chris's room, but not what Chris expected. The footage caught Peter and Quagmire sneaking into Chris's room to play pranks on him and punch him while he slept. The camera recorded Lois coming into his room to steal things from him. Herbert was caught painting Chris's portrait while he was sleeping, which was creepy and disturbing, but did not involve any monkeys. Chris finally managed to trap the evil monkey using seed as bait. After years of the monkey appearing and disappearing from his closet, Chris had successfully captured the creature. He excitedly showed the trapped monkey to his family, expecting them to be shocked and apologetic for not believing him all these years. However, the family's reaction was underwhelming. Meg casually revealed that she had an even larger and more fearsome-looking monkey in her possession. Her monkey was bigger and scarier than Chris's evil monkey, which completely stole Chris's thunder. Unfortunately for Chris, nobody in the family cared about either monkey. The revelation that Chris had been right about the evil monkey got overshadowed by Meg's bigger monkey. The evil monkey began explaining his background story to the Griffin family. Chris objected to the monkey getting sympathy, probably because he felt the monkey had tormented him for years. However, as the evil monkey told his story, he generated genuine sympathy from the rest of the family. Everyone except Chris felt bad for the monkey after hearing about his past and understanding why he had been hiding in Chris's closet, making threatening gestures. The monkey's explanation revealed he was not actually evil or trying to harm Chris, but rather was dealing with his own personal problems. Stewie and Brian executed their plan to meet Hannah Montana. They snuck into the Quahog Civic Center where she was performing. Brian approached Miley Cyrus and told her that Stewie was her biggest fan. To generate maximum sympathy and guarantee a meeting, Brian lied and claimed that Stewie had a tumor the size of a football in his head. This fabricated terminal illness story worked perfectly. Miley was touched by the story of a dying child who loved her music and wanted to meet her. She agreed to spend time with Stewie based on Brian's lie about the massive brain tumor. Back at the Griffin house, the evil monkey tried to make amends with Chris. The monkey attempted to apologize and explain that he never meant to scare or harm Chris. However, Chris rebuffed the monkey's attempts at reconciliation. Chris was still angry about years of being terrified by the monkey's sudden appearances and pointing fingers. The monkey decided to prove his good intentions through actions rather than words. While Chris slept, the evil monkey helped him with his homework. The monkey completed Chris's assignments correctly, ensuring Chris would do well on his next test. When Chris received an A on his schoolwork, he was shocked and grateful. Getting a good grade finally won Chris over and made him accept the evil monkey's friendship. Stewie showed Miley Cyrus a song he had written. He performed this original song for her, demonstrating his musical talent and creativity. The song showed how the evil monkey and Chris were getting along well now that they had resolved their differences. Stewie's performance impressed Miley, strengthening their connection. The song served as a representation of friendship and overcoming misunderstandings, themes that applied both to Chris and the monkey's relationship and to Stewie bonding with his idol. Chris and the evil monkey attended a father-son barbecue together. This event was meant for fathers and sons to bond, but Chris brought the monkey instead of Peter. Peter became jealous when he saw Chris and the monkey at the barbecue together, acting like family. Peter felt replaced and angry that his son preferred spending time with a monkey over his actual father. Chris responded to Peter's jealousy by pointing out that Peter was never there for him and never helped him with anything. Chris explained that the evil monkey had helped him with homework and actually cared about his success, while Peter had done nothing to support him. The conflict between Chris and Peter escalated dramatically. Their distaste for each other grew from arguments into open warfare. Father and son were now in direct opposition, with the evil monkey caught in the middle as the catalyst for their fight. Peter and Chris's relationship had always been somewhat dysfunctional, but the monkey's presence made Peter realize how little time and effort he put into being a good father to Chris. This realization made Peter angry rather than introspective, leading to more conflict. Meanwhile, Stewie made an unexpected discovery about Miley Cyrus. When Stewie handed Miley her cell phone, he noticed strange interference in the signal. This electromagnetic disturbance seemed unusual and out of place. Stewie's scientific mind immediately recognized something was wrong. He and Brian investigated further and made a shocking discovery. Miley Cyrus was an android, a sophisticated robot designed to look and act like a human teenager. Stewie and Brian theorized that Disney had built her to be the perfect teen idol. Creating a robot pop star meant Disney could completely control her image, behavior, and music without dealing with the unpredictability of an actual human performer. Stewie attempted to reprogram Miley Cyrus to fix whatever problems existed in her programming. He used his advanced technological skills to access her systems and modify her code. However, Stewie's reprogramming failed catastrophically. Instead of fixing Miley, Stewie's modifications caused her to malfunction and run amok. The android Miley Cyrus went berserk, her programming corrupted and her behavior turning dangerous and violent. She was no longer the sweet, controlled teen idol, but a malfunctioning robot with superhuman strength and no ethical constraints. Lois and the evil monkey decided to intervene in the Peter and Chris conflict. They recognized that the father-son relationship was falling apart and needed repair. Lois and the monkey work together to patch things up between Peter and Chris. They set up a lunch date for father and son, creating an opportunity for them to talk and hopefully reconcile. The lunch meeting started awkwardly, but Peter and Chris began making progress toward understanding each other. They started making up, acknowledging their mutual faults and expressing desire to repair their relationship. The reconciliation between Peter and Chris got violently interrupted by the malfunctioning android Miley Cyrus. She burst into the restaurant and attacked them. Miley knocked out the evil monkey with one hit, showing her superhuman android strength. She then picked up the unconscious monkey and carried him away. Miley climbed to the top of a tall building while carrying the evil monkey, putting him in extreme danger. The android's rampage had turned the evil monkey into a hostage situation. Peter immediately took action to save the evil monkey. Despite his earlier jealousy and anger toward the monkey, Peter recognized that the creature was now part of Chris's life and needed rescue. Peter called Quagmire and asked him to bring out his biplane. Quagmire owned and operated a vintage biplane, which Peter thought could be used for an aerial rescue mission. Quagmire flew his plane to the building where Miley was holding the monkey hostage. During the rescue attempt, Miley Cyrus was shot. The gunfire revealed her true nature dramatically. Her skin tore away, showing her android skeleton underneath. The mechanical framework beneath her synthetic flesh proved that Stewie and Brian's theory was correct. Miley was indeed a robot built by Disney, not a real human being. When she was shot, Miley lost her grip on the evil monkey. The monkey fell from her grasp, but managed to catch himself on a ledge on the building. He clung desperately to this narrow ledge, unable to climb back up and in danger of falling to his death. The damaged android Miley was finally driven off the top of the building. She fell from the roof, plummeting toward the ground below. Her android body crashed into the street, destroying her completely. The Disney-built robot teen idol was demolished, ending her rampage. Miley's destruction removed the immediate threat, but the evil monkey was still in danger, hanging from the building ledge. Peter executed the rescue just in time. Using Quagmire's biplane, Peter reached the evil monkey right as he was losing his grip on the ledge. The monkey's fingers were slipping, and he would have fallen to his death within seconds. Peter grabbed the monkey and pulled him to safety, completing the dramatic rescue. Despite their earlier conflicts and Peter's jealousy, Peter had risked his own life to save the creature that had befriended his son. After the rescue and Miley's destruction, the evil monkey made a significant life decision. He chose to leave the Griffin family and move in with Jake Tucker instead. Jake Tucker was a character who had appeared in previous episodes, notable for having his facial features positioned unusually on his head. The evil monkey decided Jake's household would be a better fit for him than continuing to live in Chris's closet. This move gave the monkey a fresh start with a new family while allowing Chris to reclaim his room without the constant presence of a creature living in his closet. The episode revealed several important truths about the evil monkey character. He was real, not imaginary as everyone had believed. He was not actually evil, just misunderstood and going through personal problems. He had been hiding in Chris's closet, making threatening gestures for reasons related to his own issues, rather than any desire to harm Chris. When given the opportunity, the monkey proved himself helpful and kind by assisting Chris with homework. He even inspired reconciliation between Peter and Chris, showing genuine care for the family's well-being. The Hannah Montana android subplot provided commentary on manufactured pop stars and corporate control of entertainment. Disney literally building the perfect teen idol as a robot represented how artificial and controlled the teen pop industry can be. The fact that this android could malfunction and turn violent suggested that even carefully controlled corporate entertainment products can go wrong in unexpected ways. Stewie's failed reprogramming showed that even genius-level intervention cannot always fix broken systems. The episode dealt with themes of belief, vindication, and redemption. Chris spent years being mocked for claiming the evil monkey existed. His family's refusal to believe him caused frustration and damaged his credibility. When Chris finally proved the monkey was real, he expected validation but got upstaged by Meg's bigger monkey. This denied Chris the satisfaction of being proven right, showing that sometimes vindication does not feel as good as expected. The evil monkey's redemption arc showed that beings can change and overcome negative perceptions. The monkey went from being seen as a threatening presence to becoming a helpful friend and ultimately a rescued victim. His relationship with Chris evolved from antagonistic to supportive, demonstrating that understanding someone's background and motivations can completely change how we view them. The monkey's decision to move to a different family suggested he had learned and grown from his experiences with the Griffins. Peter's rescue of the evil monkey showed growth in his character. Despite jealousy and conflict with Chris over the monkey's presence, Peter ultimately did the right thing by saving the creature's life. This heroic action demonstrated that Peter could put aside his ego and negative feelings when someone genuinely needed help. The rescue also served as a bridge toward better relations with Chris, showing Chris that his father could be there for him when it really mattered. The episode combined absurdist humor with genuine emotional moments. The revelation that Hannah Montana was a Disney-built android was ridiculous science fiction comedy. However, Chris and the evil monkey's friendship arc had real emotional weight, exploring themes of loneliness, misunderstanding, and acceptance. Stewie's sincere love for Hannah Montana showed vulnerability beneath his usually evil exterior. The episode balanced silly concepts like android pop stars and father-son barbecues with monkeys against meaningful character development and relationship evolution. The evil monkey, finding a new home with Jake Tucker, provided a bittersweet ending. Chris had finally made peace with the creature that haunted his childhood, only to have that friend move away to a different family. This ending suggested that sometimes relationships serve their purpose for a specific time period before everyone moves on. The monkey left the Griffins better than he found them, having helped Chris succeed academically and forcing Peter to confront his failures as a father. His departure marked the end of an era in Chris's life, while opening new possibilities for both Chris and the monkey in their separate futures. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Peter's real name is Justin Peter Griffin. Peter's real name is Justin Peter Griffin. Peter Griffin discovered his real first name was Justin, and this revelation sent him on a journey to completely reinvent himself as a hipster. This identity crisis happened because of fake checks, a field trip, and Peter's absolute inability to accept anything about his life as it was. The episode showed what happens when a middle-aged man decides his entire personality should change based on finding out his legal name is different than what he thought. Meanwhile, Quagmire faced serious legal consequences after picking up an underage girl at Peter's party, leading to a confrontation with his mother about her troubled past and newfound religion. The whole situation started because Meg needed a check for a school field trip. This was a simple, normal request that any parent should be able to handle easily. Meg asked Peter for a check to pay for whatever educational activity her school was planning. Peter went to write the check and discovered a major problem. His checks were fake. Peter had somehow been using counterfeit or invalid checks, which meant he could not give Meg the money she needed for her field trip. This discovery forced Peter to deal with his banking situation properly for apparently the first time. Peter decided he needed to open a real checking account at an actual bank. He went to the bank to set up legitimate accounts so he could write valid checks. Opening a checking account requires providing identification and filling out paperwork with legal information. The bank asked Peter for his birth certificate to verify his identity as part of the account opening process. Peter provided his birth certificate, and this document revealed something Peter had never known about himself. His birth certificate listed his legal first name as Justin, not Peter. Peter had gone his entire adult life thinking his first name was Peter. He had introduced himself as Peter Griffin to everyone he met. His wife called him Peter, his friends called him Peter, his children called him Peter or Dad. The name Peter was so ingrained in his identity that discovering his legal name was actually Justin came as a complete shock. His full legal name was Justin Peter Griffin, meaning Peter was actually his middle name. For reasons never explained, Peter had been using his middle name instead of his first name for his entire life. Lois tried to rein in Peter's reaction to this discovery. She probably recognized that Peter was about to do something dramatic and stupid based on learning his legal name. Lois attempted to convince Peter that this information did not matter and he should just continue being Peter like he always had been. Her efforts to control the situation failed completely. Peter immediately decided that finding out his name was Justin meant he needed to change his entire persona to match what he believed a person named Justin should be. Peter developed a specific image in his mind of what someone named Justin acted like. He decided that Justin was a young, tattooed hipster. This stereotype was based on Peter's limited understanding of modern youth culture and trends. Peter thought being named Justin meant he should dress differently, act differently, and adopt an entirely new personality. He got tattoos, changed his clothing style, and started behaving like what he imagined a hipster named Justin would behave. This transformation was immediate and extreme, showing Peter's tendency to take things way too far whenever he got a new idea. Peter decided to throw a party to celebrate his new Justin identity. He invited people over to the Griffin house for what was probably meant to be a hip, cool party befitting his new persona. The party attracted various people from Quahog, including Peter's friends. Lois tolerated the party for a while, but eventually put a stop to things. She shut down Peter's party, probably because it was getting too wild or because she was tired of Peter's ridiculous reinvention based on his legal name. However, before Lois could completely end the party, something happened that would have serious consequences. Quagmire scored with a girl named Kira, who he picked up at Peter's party. Quagmire met this girl during the party festivities and successfully convinced her to leave with him. This was standard Quagmire behavior, as he constantly pursued women and brought them home for sexual encounters. Quagmire and Kira left the party together, presumably heading back to Quagmire's house. However, there was a critical problem that Quagmire had failed to identify. Kira was underage. She was below the legal age of consent, which meant any sexual activity with her was illegal, regardless of whether she agreed to it. Joe Swanson arrested Quagmire for statutory rape. As a Quahog police officer, Joe learned about Quagmire's encounter with the underage girl and had no choice but to make an arrest. Statutory rape is a serious felony charge that carries significant prison time. The charge exists because the law recognizes that minors cannot legally consent to sexual activity with adults, making such activity automatically criminal, regardless of circumstances. Quagmire faced decades in prison if convicted of this charge. His entire life was about to be destroyed because he picked up the wrong girl at Peter's party. Quagmire's only chance for leniency at his upcoming trial was to present character witnesses. His lawyer probably advised him that having friends and community members testify about his good character could convince the judge to show mercy during sentencing. Quagmire asked his friends to serve as character witnesses, hoping their testimonies would help him avoid the maximum prison sentence. Peter and the other guys agreed to testify on Quagmire's behalf, though this decision would prove to be problematic. The character witness testimonies from Quagmire's friends were about to blow up in his face. Peter and the others were supposed to help Quagmire by telling the court what a good person he was. However, their testimonies apparently went poorly, probably because they told embarrassing stories, revealed compromising information, or generally made Quagmire look worse rather than better. Their well-meaning attempts to help were backfiring spectacularly, damaging Quagmire's case instead of improving it. Quagmire recognized that his friends were destroying his chances at leniency. Quagmire decided to take the stand himself to explain his situation. He testified in his own defense, which is always risky in criminal cases. During his testimony, Quagmire explained his childhood and family background to the court. He talked about growing up with a mother who had an overactive sex drive. Quagmire's mother, Crystal, apparently had numerous sexual partners and a lifestyle focused heavily on sexual activity. This upbringing exposed young Quagmire to inappropriate sexual behavior from an early age. Quagmire's testimony suggested that his own sexual compulsions and poor decision-making around women stemmed from his mother's example and the dysfunctional environment she created. Despite Quagmire's testimony about his troubled childhood, he still faced 20 years in prison. The The judge apparently was not swayed by the explanation of Quagmire's background. The court determined that having a promiscuous mother did not excuse statutory rape or justify leniency in sentencing. Quagmire was facing 2 decades locked away in prison, separated from his home, friends, and everything he knew. His life as he knew it was over. Just as the situation seemed completely hopeless, Quagmire's mother arrived at the courthouse. Crystal Quagmire appeared at her son's trial. She stood before the court and admitted her past behavior. Crystal acknowledged that she had been sexually promiscuous and that her lifestyle had negatively impacted her son's development. However, Crystal claimed she had changed significantly since those days. She told the court that she had found God and embraced religion. Crystal presented herself as a reformed woman who had left her sinful past behind and now lived according to Christian values. She asked the judge to release Quagmire into her custody rather than sending him to prison. The judge rejected Crystal's request completely. Despite her claims of religious conversion and promises to supervise her son, the judge did not believe releasing Quagmire to his mother was appropriate given the severity of the crime. The court was not convinced that Crystal's newfound faith made her capable of properly monitoring or rehabilitating her son. Instead of accepting her custody proposal, the judge gave Quagmire 24 hours to get his affairs in order before entering prison. Quagmire had 1 day of freedom remaining before he would be locked up for 2 decades. Quagmire went home to spend his final day of freedom. His mother, Crystal, came to the house with him, probably hoping to provide support during this difficult time. Crystal tried to get Quagmire to find solace in God and religion. She encouraged him to turn to faith for comfort and strength as he prepared to enter prison. Crystal probably believed that accepting God into his life would help Quagmire cope with the upcoming years of incarceration. She shared her own experience of how religion had transformed her life and suggested it could do the same for him. Quagmire lashed out at his mother angrily. Instead of being comforted by her religious message, he became furious. Quagmire accused Crystal of trying to use her newly found religion to absolve herself of her past actions. He believed she was using Christianity as a way to pretend her previous behavior had not mattered or had been forgiven without real consequences. Quagmire saw his mother's religious conversion as a cheap way to avoid taking responsibility for how her sexual lifestyle had damaged him psychologically and contributed to his own destructive behavior patterns. Crystal tried to reason with Quagmire and explain her perspective. She probably attempted to make him understand that her faith was genuine and that religious redemption was real. Crystal wanted Quagmire to see that people could change and that her relationship with God had legitimately transformed who she was as a person. She tried to convince him that accepting religion would help him survive prison and emerge as a better man. However, Quagmire completely rejected her advice and refused to listen to anything she said. Quagmire told his mother he would rather rot in jail than listen to her. This harsh statement showed how deep his resentment ran. Quagmire preferred spending 20 years in prison over accepting comfort or guidance from his mother. He blamed Crystal for his current situation, believing that her parenting had created the sexual compulsions that led him to commit statutory rape. Quagmire left the house angrily, ending the conversation with his mother. He prepared mentally to enter prison the next day, resigned to losing 2 decades of his life. The next morning, Quagmire prepared to report to prison to begin serving his sentence. However, something unexpected happened before he could enter jail. The judge arrived at Quagmire's house personally to deliver surprising news. The judge informed Quagmire that his sentence had been commuted. Commutation means the sentence was reduced or eliminated entirely, freeing Quagmire from the 20-year prison term. The judge explained that this commutation happened thanks to Quagmire's mother's talents. The phrase talents was clearly a euphemism for sexual favors. Crystal had apparently performed sexual acts for the judge in exchange for her son's freedom. Despite her claims of finding God and leaving her promiscuous lifestyle behind, Crystal had returned to using sex to get what she wanted. She had slept with the judge to convince him to commute Quagmire's sentence. This revelation showed that Crystal's religious conversion was either not as complete as she claimed, or that her love for her son was strong enough to make her violate her new values. Crystal had sacrificed her reformed lifestyle and religious principles to save Quagmire from prison. Quagmire was surprised that his mother would do such a thing. He had just spent the previous evening being angry at her and rejecting her attempts to help him through religion. Now he discovered that despite her newfound religious life, Crystal was willing to use her old methods to secure his freedom. Quagmire had expected his mother to stick to her religious principles no matter what, but instead she proved that her maternal love exceeded her religious convictions. Crystal had compromised everything she claimed to believe in to get her son out of prison. Crystal admitted to Quagmire that she would do anything to help him. She acknowledged that she had slept with the judge despite it contradicting her religious conversion. Crystal explained that being a mother meant making sacrifices for your children, even if those sacrifices required abandoning your values. Her willingness to prostitute herself to save her son demonstrated that maternal love can override personal principles. Crystal chose Quagmire's freedom over her own spiritual purity, showing that some bonds are stronger than religious faith. The episode explored themes of identity, responsibility, and redemption through both storylines. Peter's discovery that his legal name was Justin triggered an identity crisis where he abandoned his entire personality based on a name. This showed Peter's constant need for reinvention and his inability to accept himself as he was. His transformation into a hipster named Justin was ridiculous and completely unnecessary, but Peter committed to it fully until the storyline presumably ended with him going back to being Peter. Quagmire's statutory rape charge forced him to confront how his upbringing affected his behavior. His testimony about growing up with a sexually promiscuous mother provided context for his own sexual compulsions, but did not excuse his crime. The episode suggested that childhood trauma can contribute to destructive adult behavior patterns, but personal responsibility still matters. Quagmire faced consequences for his actions, regardless of his psychological explanations. Crystal's character arc dealt with redemption and sacrifice. Her religious conversion represented an attempt to redeem her past mistakes and become a better person. However, when faced with her son's imprisonment, Crystal sacrificed her redemption to save him. This suggested that redemption is complicated and that people sometimes have to choose between their principles and their loved ones. Crystal chose Quagmire over God, showing that maternal love was her ultimate value. The episode also commented on the criminal justice system and how it can be corrupted. A judge commuting a serious sentence in exchange for sexual favors represented a fundamental failure of justice. Quagmire escaped deserved punishment, not because of genuine rehabilitation or mitigating circumstances, but because his mother slept with the judge. This corruption meant that justice was not served and that privilege or connections could override legal consequences. Peter's subplot about his name being Justin contrasted with Quagmire's serious legal troubles. While Quagmire faced life-destroying consequences from his actions, Peter was having a midlife crisis about his first name. The juxtaposition showed the range of problems the characters dealt with, from frivolous identity issues to genuine criminal charges. Both storylines involve characters confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves, but only Quagmire's situation had real stakes. The resolution where Crystal prostituted herself to free Quagmire was morally complicated. On one hand, it showed the strength of maternal love and Crystal's willingness to sacrifice everything for her son. On the other hand, it rewarded Quagmire's criminal behavior and corrupted the justice system. Crystal enabled her son's escape from consequences, potentially preventing him from learning from his mistakes. Her sacrifice might have saved Quagmire from prison, but did nothing to address the underlying issues that caused his crime. Peter, discovering his real name was Justin Peter Griffin, became a catalyst for exploring identity and self-perception. The revelation that he had been using his middle name his entire life without knowing it raised questions about how much our names define us. Peter believed changing to Justin required changing his entire personality, suggesting he thought names determined character. His transformation into a tattooed hipster showed how superficially Peter understood identity, thinking that external changes could fundamentally alter who he was as a person. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the time Brian became a conservative. The episode where Brian became a conservative. Brian Griffin became a conservative Republican after reading a Rush Limbaugh book, proving that even the most liberal dog in Quahog could be convinced that conservative ideas made sense if the circumstances were right. This episode explored political conversion, identity, and what happens when someone adopts beliefs that contradict everything they previously stood for. Brian's transformation from left-wing liberal to right-wing conservative happened quickly and dramatically, causing conflict with his family and eventually with Rush Limbaugh himself when Brian took conservatism too far. The situation started when Lois discovered that conservative radio talk show host Rush Limbaugh was holding a book signing in Quahog, Rhode Island. Limbaugh was one of the most famous conservative voices in America, known for his radio show where he promoted Republican values and criticized liberal policies. His presence in Quahog created an opportunity for anyone interested in meeting him or getting his autograph. For Brian, however, this news triggered a different reaction. Brian was a committed liberal who strongly disagreed with conservative politics and especially disliked prominent conservative figures like Rush Limbaugh. Brian decided to confront Rush Limbaugh about his political beliefs at the book signing. Brian planned to go to the mall and give Limbaugh a piece of his left-wing mind. He wanted to challenge Limbaugh's views directly and argue with him about conservative policies. Brian probably imagined himself delivering a devastating critique of conservative ideology that would leave Limbaugh speechless and embarrassed. This confrontation would allow Brian to feel morally superior and demonstrate his intellectual prowess to anyone watching. Brian attended the book signing at the Quahog Mall. He approached Rush Limbaugh, ready to argue and debate. However, the confrontation did not go as Brian planned. Before Brian could launch into his prepared arguments against conservatism, Rush Limbaugh asked him a simple question. Limbaugh asked whether Brian had actually read anything he had ever written. This was a straightforward question about whether Brian was familiar with Limbaugh's actual arguments and books, or if he was just reacting to what he heard about Limbaugh secondhand. Brian was completely dumbfounded by this question. He apparently had not read any of Limbaugh's books or writings. Brian had formed his negative opinion of Rush Limbaugh based on reputation, media coverage, and secondhand information, rather than engaging directly with Limbaugh's actual arguments. This meant Brian was planning to criticize someone's ideas without bothering to understand what those ideas actually were. Limbaugh's question exposed that Brian's opposition was based on prejudice rather than informed disagreement. Brian left the book signing in frustration. He was embarrassed that Limbaugh had revealed his ignorance so easily. Instead of getting to deliver his prepared arguments, Brian got exposed as someone who criticized without reading or understanding what he was criticizing. This humiliation probably made Brian angry at himself and at Limbaugh for making him look foolish in public. Brian walked away from the mall upset about how the encounter had gone. That night, as Brian was walking home, he was suddenly attacked by a street gang. Multiple gang members jumped Brian, putting him in serious physical danger. Brian was just a dog, walking alone at night, making him an easy target for criminals looking for a victim. The gang members were about to seriously hurt or possibly kill Brian. He had no way to defend himself against multiple human attackers. The situation seemed hopeless for Brian until someone intervened. Rush Limbaugh immediately saved Brian from the gang attack. Limbaugh appeared and single-handedly defeated all the gang members. He fought off multiple attackers by himself, protecting Brian from harm. This rescue was heroic and unexpected. Limbaugh showed physical courage and fighting skills that saved Brian's life. The man Brian had come to the mall to insult and confront had just risked his own safety to protect Brian from violent criminals. This created a debt of gratitude that complicated Brian's feelings about Limbaugh. Thankful for being saved, Brian agreed to read Rush Limbaugh's book. This was probably the least Brian could do after Limbaugh had rescued him from a gang beating. Brian took the book home and actually read it this time, engaging with Limbaugh's arguments directly instead of dismissing them without understanding them. As Brian read through the book, something unexpected happened. The arguments Limbaugh made started to make sense to Brian. The conservative ideas presented in the book convinced Brian that maybe he had been wrong about politics all along. Brian soon began to believe that conservative republicanism was right. After reading Limbaugh's book, Brian underwent a complete political conversion. He abandoned his liberal beliefs and adopted conservative ideology. Brian now thought that Republican policies were better than Democratic policies. He embraced conservative ideas about government, economics, social issues, and everything else. This transformation happened quickly, showing how influential the book was on Brian's thinking. Brian went from being a committed liberal to a conservative Republican in a very short time. The next morning, Lois questioned Brian's conviction about his new political beliefs. She was suspicious of Brian's sudden conversion to conservatism. Lois cited Brian's past liberalism, reminding him of all the times he had argued for liberal causes and against conservative policies. She probably thought Brian was being manipulated or going through a phase. Lois challenged whether Brian's conversion was genuine or if he was just being influenced by Limbaugh's charisma and the gratitude he felt for being rescued. Brian defended his right to change his mind. He argued that people are allowed to reconsider their beliefs when presented with new information or better arguments. Brian insisted that his conversion to conservatism was legitimate and based on actually reading and understanding conservative ideas for the first time. He probably felt that his previous liberalism had been uninformed and that reading Limbaugh's book had opened his eyes to the truth. Brian saw his political conversion as intellectual growth rather than being brainwashed or manipulated. Brian decided to talk with Rush Limbaugh about the book. He went to find Limbaugh and thank him for both saving his life and for writing a book that changed Brian's political perspective. Brian expressed gratitude for how Limbaugh's ideas had transformed his understanding of politics. Limbaugh was probably pleased that his book had converted a liberal dog to conservatism. The two bonded over Brian's newfound conservative beliefs. Limbaugh invited Brian to come with him to see the Republican Party's operations firsthand. Brian and Rush traveled together to the Republican National Headquarters. This was the central office for the Republican Party, where party leadership worked and made decisions. Visiting this location showed Brian the inner workings of conservative politics. At the headquarters, they were greeted by former President of the United States, George W. Bush, and United States Senator John McCain. These were major Republican figures who welcomed Brian and Rush. Meeting Bush and McCain gave Brian access to high-level conservative politicians, reinforcing his conversion by connecting him with powerful people who shared his new beliefs. Returning home after visiting Republican headquarters, Brian informed Lois that Rush Limbaugh would be coming over for dinner. Brian invited Limbaugh to the Griffin House, probably wanting to share his new political mentor with his family. This dinner invitation set up a confrontation between Limbaugh's conservatism and the Griffin family's more liberal views. Lois and Peter were not conservatives, so having Rush Limbaugh at their dinner table guaranteed political arguments would happen. That night at dinner, Lois and Peter began arguing with Rush Limbaugh and challenging him politically. They disagreed with his conservative positions and debated him on various political issues. Lois and Peter tried to point out flaws in conservative ideology and defend liberal positions. This turned dinner into a political debate rather than a pleasant meal. The arguing showed that the Griffin family was not accepting Brian's conversion quietly. They were fighting back against both Limbaugh's presence and Brian's adoption of conservative beliefs. Lois decided to confront Rush Limbaugh directly about brainwashing Brian. She accused Limbaugh of manipulating Brian's mind and changing his personality. Lois demanded that Rush give them back their dog the way he used to be. She wanted Brian to return to his previous liberal beliefs and stop being conservative. Lois saw Brian's political conversion as a form of mind control that needed to be reversed. Her confrontation with Limbaugh became personal rather than just political. Brian became angered by Lois's confrontation and accusations. He felt insulted that Lois thought he was brainwashed rather than genuinely convinced by conservative arguments. Brian saw Lois's demand that he change back as an attack on his autonomy and intelligence. He was offended that his family would not respect his right to hold different political beliefs. Brian's anger at Lois's treatment of him and Limbaugh led him to make a dramatic decision. Brian decided to move out of the Griffin house and become roommates with Rush Limbaugh. This was an extreme reaction to the dinner argument, showing how seriously Brian took the conflict. Moving in with Limbaugh meant abandoning his family because they would not accept his political conversion. Brian chose his new conservative beliefs over his home and relationships. Limbaugh apparently agreed to let Brian live with him, accepting this liberal-turned-conservative dog as his roommate. Rush asked Brian whether he was intending to stay at his home for just a few days. This question suggested Limbaugh expected Brian's stay to be temporary, not a permanent living arrangement. However, Brian's presence quickly became problematic. Brian began to irritate Rush Limbaugh with his newfound conservatism. Brian was apparently overdoing his conservative beliefs, being more extreme or enthusiastic about conservative ideas than Limbaugh himself. The very thing that brought them together, Brian's conversion to conservatism, was now creating tension because Brian was taking it too far. Brian decided to follow Rush Limbaugh to his radio show. Limbaugh had a nationally syndicated radio program where he discussed politics and promoted conservative ideology. Brian apparently wanted to participate in this show and share his own political opinions on air. Brian attempted to voice his own political opinions about Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi during the broadcast. Pelosi was a prominent Democratic politician who conservatives frequently criticized. Brian probably said something harsh or extreme about Pelosi on Limbaugh's show. Rush became frustrated with Brian's interruption and threw him out of the radio studio. Limbaugh did not appreciate Brian hijacking his show or saying whatever Brian wanted on air. Being thrown out physically from the radio show was humiliating for Brian and showed that even Rush Limbaugh had limits on how much of Brian's behavior he would tolerate. Brian had crossed a line by trying to take over Limbaugh's show with his own opinions. Brian decided to prove Rush Limbaugh wrong by taking action against Nancy Pelosi. Brian attempted to waterboard Pelosi, which meant subjecting her to a torture technique where water is poured over someone's face to simulate drowning. This was an incredibly illegal and violent act. Brian had apparently become so extreme in his conservatism that he thought torturing a Democratic politician was appropriate. Waterboarding Pelosi showed that Brian had completely lost perspective and was taking conservative ideas to a dangerous extreme. Brian was apprehended and arrested before he could successfully waterboard Nancy Pelosi. Law enforcement stopped Brian's attempted torture and took him into custody. Brian now faced serious criminal charges for attempting to torture a sitting member of Congress. He was put in jail, ending his brief career as an extreme conservative activist. Brian's arrest demonstrated that he had taken his political conversion way too far and committed actual crimes based on his newfound beliefs. Rush Limbaugh bailed Brian out of jail later that day. Despite being frustrated with Brian earlier, Limbaugh paid Brian's bail and got him released from custody. This showed that Limbaugh still cared about Brian, even though Brian's behavior had become problematic. After getting bailed out, Brian continued to assert his conservatism to Limbaugh. Brian insisted he was a real conservative now and defended his extreme actions. He apparently did not understand that attempting to torture politicians was wrong, regardless of political beliefs. Rush Limbaugh attempted to convince Brian that he was only fighting against the establishment because of his desire to be the underdog. Limbaugh explained to Brian that his conversion to conservatism was not genuine, but rather part of Brian's pattern of being contrarian. Brian always positioned himself as the underdog, fighting against mainstream thinking. When liberalism was mainstream and comfortable for Brian, he embraced it. Now that Brian saw conservatism as the underdog position, he adopted it for the same psychological reasons. Limbaugh suggested Brian did not actually believe conservative ideas, but just wanted to rebel against whatever seemed like the establishment. Rush reassured Brian of his liberal convictions. Limbaugh convinced Brian that he was actually a liberal at heart, and that his conservative phase was just Brian being contrary and reactionary. Limbaugh helped Brian understand that genuine political beliefs come from deep convictions, not from reading one book or wanting to be different. Brian apparently accepted this explanation and realized that his conservative conversion had been shallow and based on the wrong motivations. Rush Limbaugh, the conservative radio host, had talked Brian out of being conservative. Rush left the prison after reassuring Brian about his true political identity. Brian and Limbaugh walked outside together after Brian's release. Outside the jail, they heckled each other with reassurance, trading friendly insults or comments while affirming that they understood each other despite their political differences. This showed that Brian and Limbaugh had developed mutual respect even though they remained on opposite sides politically. Their relationship had survived Brian's temporary insanity and his attempt to torture Nancy Pelosi. The episode ended with Rush Limbaugh transforming into a bald eagle and flying away into the skyline. The bald eagle is America's national bird and a symbol often associated with patriotism and American values. Limbaugh turning into a bald eagle and flying away was a surreal, fantastical ending that suggested something mythical or symbolic about Limbaugh's character. This transformation implied that Limbaugh represented some essential American spirit that transcended normal human limitations. He flew off into the sky, leaving Brian behind to process everything that had happened. The episode explored themes of political identity, intellectual honesty, and the difference between genuine beliefs and reactive contrarianism. Brian's journey from liberal to conservative and back to liberal showed how easily political opinions can shift when based on superficial understanding rather than deep conviction. His initial criticism of Limbaugh without reading his work demonstrated intellectual dishonesty. His conversion after reading one book showed how vulnerable Brian was to persuasive arguments. His extreme behavior as a conservative proved he did not really understand what he claimed to believe. The episode also examined how gratitude and personal relationships can influence political beliefs. Brian's conversion happened partially because Limbaugh saved his life. The debt Brian felt toward Limbaugh made him more receptive to conservative arguments. This suggested that political beliefs are not always rational, but can be influenced by emotions and personal connections. Brian wanted to agree with the man who saved him, so he convinced himself that conservatism was right. Rush Limbaugh's characterization in the episode was surprisingly positive despite Family Guy's typically liberal perspective. Limbaugh was shown as heroic for saving Brian, intellectually honest by questioning whether Brian had read his work, and ultimately caring enough about Brian to talk him out of extreme behavior. Limbaugh recognized that Brian's conversion was not genuine and helped Brian return to his true beliefs. This portrayal suggested that even political opponents can have redeeming qualities, and that honest conservatives and liberals can respect each other. Brian's attempt to waterboard Nancy Pelosi represented taking political beliefs to violent extremes. This showed the danger of becoming so convinced of your political ideology that you think violence against opponents is justified. Brian had gone from peaceful liberal who wanted to argue with Limbaugh to attempted torturer in a very short time. This rapid escalation demonstrated how political extremism can develop when someone adopts beliefs without really understanding them or their implications. The episode's resolution, where Limbaugh convinced Brian he was actually liberal, suggested that some people have fundamental political temperaments that cannot be changed by reading books or meeting charismatic figures. Brian was liberal because that aligned with his personality and values, not because he had carefully considered all political options. His brief conservative phase was an aberration caused by unusual circumstances rather than a genuine ideological shift. True political beliefs run deeper than surface-level conversions. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.